Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere a little smoky, a little loud and possibly covered in goat hair. You just got married. You, yes you, are now one half of a Viking marriage. It's the morning after the ceremony, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Not emotionally anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment. What city are you watching from, and what time is it over there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the low crackle of the hearth fire, barely holding on in the morning chill. Smoke snakes its way up to the ceiling slats, and the scent is half ash, half sheep. Your body aches in a very particular way, partly from the hours of feasting, drinking and dancing, and partly because you slept on a bed of straw that might also have contained a stray chicken. Feather a bead or somebody's errant bone comb. Your head feels like it hosted a thunder god's drumming contest, and your mouth tastes like fermented honey and regret. Next to you lies your brand new spouse, breathing heavily, tangled in wool blankets. You haven't quite figured them out yet. Who snores, who hogs the covers, who talks in their sleep about ancestral vengeance. But congratulations, because ready or not, you're officially cohabitating. And no, you didn't get a separate suite. You're in a household where walls are made of intent, not wood. Curtains, if you're lucky. Everyone heard everything, and now they're all awake. There's movement in the longhouse, footsteps on packed dirt, muffled voices, a clatter of pots. You see the matriarch emerge from the shadows with a jug of water and a knowing smirk. She's already cleaned the hearth and milked 2 goats. You, on the other hand, still smell like roasted boar and last night's mead. The hangover hits in full as you sit up, your hair somehow both matted and sticky, and realise that your day, your life, is about to get very complicated. You're not even allowed a peaceful morning stretch. There's a bustle around you, and the family is pretending to not stare, but they're definitely watching. In this world, a wedding night is everyone's business. You're not a private couple, you're a public alliance, a contract, a cosmic balancing act between 2 families, maybe 2 clans. You thought last night was the main event? That was just the handshake. This is when the real social chess begins. The smell of porridge floats over, and someone places a clay bowl beside you with a bit too much ceremony. There's an elder, a distant cousin or a half-uncle or some man whose job it is to silently loom, standing nearby with his arms crossed, giving you the world's slowest head nod. It's meant to be approving, maybe. Hard to tell under all that beard. You stretch your neck and finally manage to rise, every joint protesting. Your spouse does the same, and for a weird moment, the 2 of you share a glance, half bewildered, half amused. Neither of you really know what happens next, but everyone else seems to. Your clothes from the day before are neatly folded at your feet, which is generous of someone, considering one of your boots is missing. A cousin brings it over, sheepishly grinning, and drops it at your feet with a quiet thud. You mutter thanks, pull it on, and brace for whatever ritual or expectation awaits. Because there is one. There's always one. This is the part where we zoom out just a little, and let's get historical for a second. Viking marriages weren't about love. Not primarily anyway. They were agreements between families, usually arranged to gain land, status, or peace. The wedding night might have sealed the bond physically, but the morning after was for social sealing. Which means that today you're going to be watched, judged, tested, and, if you're lucky, slowly accepted. Now, a fun, weird little sidebar. In some Icelandic sagas, the morning after the wedding included poetic duels. Imagine that. You're still dizzy from last night, and suddenly some cousin challenges you to a rhyme battle because he thinks your family's sheep are subpar. It's part insult, part entertainment, and mostly chaos. You might want to start prepping your best alliteration now. Maybe something like low-browed braggart, brewer of bad barley. But back to your morning. There's no breakfast in bed here. You're expected to join the communal table, where seating is very intentional. Who you sit next to says everything about how people think this marriage is going to go. You're next to your spouse's aunt. Stern, no-nonsense, possibly enchanted, and across from someone who definitely tried to marry your partner before you showed up. The food is simple, thick porridge, coarse bread, smoked fish, maybe a few berries if you're inland and lucky. Your stomach churns a little, but you manage a few bites while nodding politely. Someone pours you water, someone else offers more mead. You consider declining, but then remember, this is Viking culture. Refusing hospitality is the social equivalent of spitting into the god's soup. So you drink, again, and hope it doesn't come back up. Now here's the open debate that scholars still toss around. How much autonomy did a newly married Viking really have on day one? Some argue that couples had a surprising amount of private time to form their bond. Others insist that extended families ran the show from sun-up to sundown. Judging by the hovering elders and whispered critiques around you, today is definitely the latter. The morning passes in a haze of formalities. People want to know how you slept, not because they care, but because the answer is a coded message. Soundly means everything's fine. With interruption means maybe the union isn't so blessed. I don't remember is only acceptable if said with a laugh and a wink, and you do your best to toe that line. Outside, the light changes. You can hear someone splitting wood. A child chases a chicken past the door. The world moves on, and yet for you, it's all just beginning. You're not the same person who walked into this longhouse yesterday. You're someone's partner now, a new thread in an old tapestry, and trust me, that thread is about to get tugged in all directions. You haven't even finished your second bite of porridge when it starts. There's a subtle shift in the energy around the hearth, like when the wind changes direction just before a storm. A few elders rise quietly from the bench. You feel it before you see it, the slight tightening tension in your spouse's shoulders, the way everyone suddenly avoids eye contact. Something is coming, and sure enough, a thin woman with a face like a dried apple and fingers that move like they've counted more lambs than stars steps forward holding a sheet. The sheet! You freeze. So does your spouse. The matriarch holds it up, arms outstretched like she's about to unveil a sacred relic. And in a weird way she is. This is the linen cloth you two slept on last night. And what they're looking for, what everyone is pretending not to look for, is a small iron-rich stain. A speck. A bloom. A sign. It's the blood check ritual. In Viking-age Scandinavia, especially among the upper classes, the presence of blood on the marriage sheet was seen as a form of proof that the union had been consummated, and, ideally, that the bride had entered it as a virgin. If the couple were young, this ritual could be held with a kind of grim pride. If they weren't, well, let's just say, not all linens tell the same story, and there's no hiding. The sheet is held up to the firelight and half the room tilts their heads like chickens watching a falling leaf. You consider sinking into your porridge and never resurfacing. Your spouse coughs quietly. The matriarch studies the fabric like she's reading runes from Odin himself. Then, just as slowly, she gives a satisfied grunt. It's barely audible, but it echoes like thunder. She folds the cloth, nods. That's it. Judgment rendered. Your union is now officially endorsed by fluids and folklore. No one cheers, thankfully, but several people suddenly act like they're less tense. One man even starts humming again. You'd think this would be the most awkward part of the day, but give it time. The bloodsheet tradition wasn't universal, and some scholars argue it wasn't that widespread outside certain noble circles. But in some regions, like parts of Sweden or Denmark, it was treated with all the drama of a courtroom finale. There are accounts where entire family alliances collapsed over a missing stain. Did the couple fake it? Was the linen swapped? Was someone not pure? It's hard to imagine today, but in a world obsessed with inheritance and honour, a red dot could decide your entire future. Now for a twist of the weird. In a few fringe cases, when the expected blood didn't appear, there were backup plans. One included nicking the bride's inner arm with a needle and creating the proof. Another involved slaughtering a chicken discreetly and dabbing the cloth. If you're wondering how anyone was fooled by poultry blood, they probably weren't. But everyone liked a convenient fiction now and then. Back in your longhouse, the tension slowly unwinds like a loosened braid. People resume eating. You try to pretend this moment didn't just happen, but it's hard when 3 different uncles give you that special knowing smirk. One even mutters something about strong seed and winks. You make a mental note to never speak to him again. Your spouse seems oddly calm about it all. Maybe they grew up expecting this, or maybe they're better at hiding their embarrassment. Either way, there's a sense that something invisible has shifted. You're not just strangers who slept beside each other. You're now a pair, observed, recorded, and added to the community ledger. There's a strange pride in that, a strange weight too. After the inspection, the sheet is taken away, likely to be stored somewhere in the family's possessions, a bizarre relic of your first morning together. You try not to think about it hanging in a chest next to a rusting brooch or some ancestor's jawbone pendant. The room is suddenly much louder. Voices rise again. The awkwardness breaks like ice on a thawing river. Someone starts playing a lyre in the corner. 2 children race around your bench and nearly topple your spouse's bowl. The longhouse breathes again, and so do you. But not for long, because just as you lean back trying to absorb everything that's already happened, your new mother-in-law appears behind you and drops a heavy hand onto your shoulder. It's not a comforting hand. It's the hand of a woman about to tell you what happens next. You will not like it. She leans close and says, "We've done the sheet. Now we do the count." You're ushered away from the fire, through a curtain of dried herbs, into a side room, or what passes for one. 3 stone lamps flicker here, casting shadows across wooden chests and stacked linen. It smells like lavender and mutton grease. And in the centre of it all is a low table covered in trinkets. Brooches, knives, cloth, tools, and a very neat stack of silver rings. It's your munda and himenfylgja, the bride price and dowry. And now comes the next weird performance. The dowry inventory is an official tally. Everyone present confirms what was given and what was promised. Some of the items might already have changed hands during the wedding feast. Others are symbolic, like a horsehair rope to show land ownership, or a small iron key to signify control of the household stores. If anything is missing, if the value doesn't match what was agreed, the marriage can actually be challenged. Not undone necessarily, but put under suspicion. You're glad you're not the one doing the counting, but that doesn't stop people from explaining everything in excruciating detail. 3 goats, says an aunt, tapping each one carved into a wooden ledger board. 2 sacks of rye. 1 bronze arm ring from the eastern coast, value high. Your eyes glaze over around item 14, but your spouse seems oddly interested. They are keeping score in their head, maybe wondering what you brought to the table, or whether it's worth what they gave up. There's a brief debate over whether the iron pot counts as 1 item or 2, because it came with a lid. Someone offers a joke that doesn't land, someone else calls for a drink. You can't tell if you're at a trade fair or a very tense game night, but either way you're a prize on a table being measured out loud. This wasn't unusual. Viking marriages were legally binding economic deals, and if the marriage ended, yes, Viking divorce was real, each party had to know exactly what was owed. Property wasn't just cattle and land, it was also shirts, looms, tools and boons. Some contracts even specified what to do with the household dog. Eventually the inventory ends, the family nods their approval, and the chest is locked. The key, that goes to your spouse, for now. You step back into the main room of the longhouse, blinking at the firelight. The day is still young, and already you've had your bodily fluids evaluated, your possessions counted, and your reputation half decided by a matron with hawk eyes. But the strangest thing, you're still just getting started. You barely have time to shake off the awkward aftertaste of the linen inspection and the dowry math-off before you're pointed, politely but firmly, toward the longhouse benches for another deeply uncomfortable event. Breakfast with the in-laws. And not just breakfast. A public-seated, deeply performative morning meal where every bite you take is weighed for meaning, and every sip of mead is a political statement. You're pretty sure even your choice of spoon might matter. You shuffle back toward the hearth and there they are, already seated. The parents, the grandparents, a half-brother with an inexplicably elaborate hair braid, and at least 2 people who didn't talk to you at the wedding but now appear very invested in how well you hold a cup. You sit down next to your spouse who's clearly been through this before, judging by how calmly they butter a chunk of barley bread, like they're hosting a feast for a pack of wolves in tunics. Across from you is your new mother-in-law. She has a stare like a spear tip. It's not angry, it's just sharp. She hands you a bowl of thick, steaming fish stew, and then she waits, just sits there, hands folded, watching. You realise too late. This is a test. A weird, spoon-based, centuries-old loyalty test. You take a careful bite. It's salty. Really salty. Like, did we boil this in the ocean levels of salty? But you chew, smile, nod like it's a gift from Thor himself. She doesn't smile back, but she does reach for her own spoon. Small win. Breakfast continues, awkwardly. Every exchange matters. You say thank you when offered dried berries. Good, polite. You don't speak while chewing, excellent, well raised. You reach for a shared honey dish before the eldest uncle finishes his bad, impulsive. Your spouse nudges your foot under the table, which in Viking culture probably counts as a full lecture. Message received. Let's pause here for a quirk of history. Viking households were multi-generational, crowded, and ran more like small businesses than cosy homes. Meals weren't just for eating. They were for displaying alliances, whispering strategy, and making 1,000 small observations about who was competent and who needed to be quietly sent to tend the goats. You are now officially under review. Someone leans over to ask if you can weave. Another wonders if you're good with fish hooks. You stammer out something about knowing how to carve antler into buttons, which seems to impress a great-aunt whose hands are permanently stained with tannin. She gives a single approving grunt. Progress. The grandfather at the head of the bench, who has yet to speak, finally clears his throat. The room stills. He lifts his hand, points at you, and asks, "Do you sing?" That's it. No context, just that. You panic internally. Turns out, many Viking families expected a new spouse to offer some kind of performance during the post-wedding days, something that showed off skills, talent, or just sheer social courage. It could be a song, a poem, a story about your village's oddest weather. Refusing wasn't exactly an insult, but agreeing meant points with the older generation. You sing, sort of. It's a strange little chant your aunt taught you, something about a raven and a lost sock. It's weird, vaguely threatening and oddly catchy. You finish. Silence. Then someone claps. Just once, but it counts. Now here's a scholarly debate that still makes historians wrinkle their foreheads. How much of this mealtime ritual was real social vetting, and how much was just performative tradition? Some say it was deeply serious. You could win or lose the family's full support before the plates were cleared. Others argue it was more symbolic, like reading out wedding vows no one really plans to enforce. The truth probably depends on the family. Yours, unfortunately, seems like the type that takes it very seriously. The breakfast winds down slowly, bowls are cleared, crumbs are brushed into the fire, someone offers you a rag to wipe your fingers, and for a moment you think you're free to escape. But nope, your spouse's mother catches your arm and leans in. "There's a rhythm to the house," she says. "Learn it quickly." That's it. No further explanation. She stands and walks away, leaving you blinking and wondering if you've just been threatened or welcomed. Possibly both. You and your spouse wander outside for a breath of air. The sun is higher now, and everything smells like dew and horse. You can see the smoke trails from other houses rising in lazy spirals, hear the clatter of hooves and the occasional goat shriek. Children chase each other between hay bales. A dog barks in the distance. You almost forget that just an hour ago, your sheets were under public inspection, and your taste in stew was being analysed like battlefield strategy. Your spouse finally speaks again. "That went well," they say. You raise an eyebrow. "That was well?" "No one threw anything," they shrug. "Better than average." You laugh, your first real laugh of the day, and it's strangely comforting. Not everything has to be survival. Some things, like a smile or a shared joke, feel almost normal. And here's a delightful oddity. In some Viking communities, there was a belief that laughter during the first morning together was a good omen. A loud, real laugh meant the gods had blessed the union with joy, or at least a shared sense of absurdity. So maybe you've earned your first celestial point. But your moment of peace doesn't last long. One of the family's younger cousins, around 9, maybe 10, missing a front tooth and already brandishing a wooden sword, runs up to inform you that you're needed again. "There's a counting," he says ominously, and then runs off cackling. You sigh. Counting of what? Sheep, hens, mistakes? But no, this is the real counting. The public dowry inventory is done, but now there's a more private one. Your personal belongings being sorted and placed into what will be your shared space. If you brought anything sentimental, anything secret, now's the time to argue for its place. Your spouse meets your eyes. "This is where we find out," they say. "Find out what?" "If we get to keep the same blanket." And just like that, you're off to another trial. Because apparently Viking marriage wasn't just a union, it was an obstacle course, and you're only on day 1. You follow your spouse back inside, ducking under a low wooden beam and past the fire where someone's now roasting what looks suspiciously like squirrel. A thick layer of smoke hugs the ceiling like it's decided to settle in permanently, and you cough as you pass through a curtain of drying herbs. You've entered the couple's new living quarters, or at least what passes for them. This is your shared bed closet. And no, that's not a cute nickname. It's an actual curtained-off section of the longhouse that functions as your private room. Except it's not private. It's essentially 3 planks and a wool curtain separating your new life from a chorus of in-laws, livestock, and mysterious nighttime rustling. If you want real silence, you'll need to marry into a monastery. Still, this space has been cleared with surprising care. A low platform holds a straw mattress, your mattress now, congratulations, and there's a fur draped over it that you strongly suspect used to be alive last week. A small chest has been set near the foot of the bed. Its lid open like a mouth ready to swallow your belongings. The few things you brought, rolled linen, a carved comb, a little bag of coins, and a knife you'll never use but always keep close, are laid out for inspection. Your spouse is already there, sorting their own items with a kind of practiced nonchalance. There's a fishing hook wrapped in leather, a small jar of what might be lard or might be some form of ancestor ointment, and, most impressively, a real bronze clasp. Not fancy, but solid, durable. You imagine it will last longer than most people in this house. The moment hangs quiet as you both kneel by the chest, negotiating space with awkward diplomacy. Your hand brushes theirs once, and you both pretend it didn't happen. Sharing space is suddenly intimate in a way last night wasn't. This isn't just about sleeping next to someone. This is about choosing where your socks go and who gets the good corner of the mattress, the one that doesn't slope downward into a dip that smells vaguely like mould and despair. You place your comb gently on the folded tunic and slide it inside. Your spouse watches. "Is that the one with the bone inlay?" they ask. You nod. "My aunt gave it to me. She said it keeps lice away." They nod solemnly, like this is a matter of national security. Lice respect craftsmanship. You smile. The chest is slowly filling item by item, and with it something else. Some strange, quiet sense of building. Of territory claimed. It's domestic, sure, but also symbolic. Viking marriage didn't involve shared bank accounts or mutual Netflix passwords. It involved chests, keys, and an ever-shifting line between yours, mine, and ours. The question of shared space was a real one, especially since Viking longhouses were designed less for comfort and more for functionality. Everything had a purpose, often 2 or 3. Your bed wasn't just for sleeping. It might be used for storing grain sacks underneath. The curtain might double as a shroud in hard times. Even your chest could be borrowed if the in-laws decided your items were community property. And the rules? They weren't written, they were negotiated, daily, in muttered commentary and passive-aggressive repositioning of buckets. Now comes the part they don't tell you in the sagas, introduction. Your spouse leads you through the longhouse proper, where you meet one by one every person you'll now be living with. First there's the blacksmith cousin who may or may not sleep in the loft. He grunts at you and continues hammering what looks like a broken cauldron. Next is a small, scowling woman who handles the dairy. She's already suspicious of your ability to churn. There's a teenage boy who says nothing but stares too long, and a child who offers you a dead mouse as a greeting gift. You accept it. You don't know what else to do. At the far end of the room is a half-blind grandmother who grabs your wrist and mumbles something about a vision involving wolves and your eyebrows. She lets go before you can ask follow-up questions. Your spouse shrugs and says, "She predicted my cousin would be gored by a pig. 3 years later it happened. Kind of." In total, there are at least 10 people under this roof, not counting guests and passers-by. It's less a household and more a small village crammed into one structure. The heat is stifling, the air tour constantly shifting between smoke, sweat, and sour milk. You will never, ever be alone. This was the Viking way. Households weren't nuclear, they were multi-generational machines built for survival. Your marriage didn't create a new unit. It plugged you into a system, and that system has rules, some of which are impossible to learn until you've already broken them. One strange historical note. In some Viking households, married couples didn't even sleep together every night. If one spouse had night chores, or the house was overcrowded, they might bunk elsewhere. Privacy was fluid. You had to steal moments where you could, on a quiet walk, during chores, or under that itchy wool curtain while someone's goat stared directly at you from the hallway. Back in your shared closet, the last of your things are placed in the chest. Your spouse closes the lid with a soft thump and sits beside you. For a few seconds it's quiet. Just the crackle of the fire, the cluck of a chicken somewhere outside, and the distant thud of someone failing at splitting firewood. "Do you think," your spouse says slowly, "that we'll get used to this?" You look around. at the curtain, the bed, the tightly packed belongings, and say the only honest thing you can. Probably. Or we'll get really good at pretending. They laugh, a small real laugh, and that's enough for now. Outside, voices rise again. It's time for the next task. You stand together, your knees creaking in unison like synchronized ship masts, and prepare to step back into the chaos. Your shared life, for better or worse, has officially begun. No one tells you that walking back into the main room of the longhouse after moving into your curtained cubicle of marital bliss is like re-entering a play where everyone knows their lines, except you. The fire's been stoked, someone's rearranged the benches, and your new uncle, who has an impressive collection of forehead wrinkles and absolutely no sense of humour, is lining up the leftover roasted meat from yesterday's feast like it's sacred cargo. You quickly realise what's happening. It's time for the second round of introductions, not of people this time, but of what's left. The feast hasn't quite ended. Viking weddings didn't last just one day. Sometimes they went on for several, especially if the families involved had money, livestock, or an excess of alcohol. Today the atmosphere is a mix of hangover and celebration. This is the clean-up party, the part where people eat the leftovers, retell the same stories with slight edits, and, most importantly, gossip. You and your spouse are nudged toward a bench near the long table, which now groans under the weight of smoked eel, congealed boar fat, yesterday's bread, harder than a shield, and a suspiciously dry pile of something someone insists is cabbage. There's also mead. Of course, there's always mead. You sit down, cautiously sipping from the clay cup someone thrusts into your hand. A woman you don't recognise is sitting directly across from you, digging into a bowl of fish stew with violent intensity. She looks up mid-chew and says, "So, did you two sleep through the thunder last night? Or were you the thunder?" She grins, revealing exactly 2 teeth. You manage a polite laugh, your spouse chokes slightly on their drink. This is what passes for morning gossip. People openly speculate about the wedding night, the family arrangements, and who brought the most impressive dowry item. Spoiler, it's a miniature silver Thor's hammer gifted by a cousin who once met a man who swore he saw the god in a storm cloud. You're expected to laugh along, give just enough detail to fuel the fire, and pretend you don't notice when someone mentions your name, followed by a suspiciously long pause. There's even a short toast made by your new father-in-law, who stands up without warning, slams a mead horn on the table, and declares in a voice like thunder, "To strong alliances, strong arms, and strong beds," everyone cheers. You nearly spill your drink in shock. Your spouse gives you a helpless shrug. This is apparently normal. Historically, Viking households weren't subtle about these things. Sexual openness wasn't seen as shameful. It was a part of life, part of fertility, part of your role in continuing the family line. A healthy sense of humour about it all was expected. If you blush too easily, you might as well paint your forehead with the words "easy to rattle" and wait for your neighbours to make it a drinking game. One slightly odd but fascinating historical tidbit. In some regions, post-wedding gossip was almost ritualised. There are accounts of families gathering to tease, question, and push the newlyweds just enough to see if they could handle the heat. If you snapped, that said something about your fitness as a spouse. If you rolled with it, congratulations, you just passed the unspoken Viking vibe check. As the meal goes on, the stories get weirder. Someone tells a tale about a wedding where the bride passed out before the ceremony, and the groom married her stand-in cousin without realising it until 2 days later. Another boasts about having the best post-wedding meal ever. Roast walrus tongue with a side of fermented seaweed. You nod politely, wondering how many people are making things up purely for entertainment. Then someone brings out the drinking dice. Or, well, they're not dice in the modern sense, just carved pieces of bone marked with symbols. A kind of game begins, one that involves rolling a symbol, naming a person in the room, and asking them to answer a question or do something mildly humiliating. Your spouse tries to pull you away before it's your turn, but too late. Someone rolls a symbol that apparently means newest married, and suddenly all eyes are on you. The question, what did you dream last night? You blink. Your dream? You barely remember anything. Maybe a vague sense of firelight, some goats, your mother yelling at you from the other side of a mountain. But that's hardly shareable. So you do what any reasonable person does. You make something up. I dreamed, you say carefully, that we were riding across a frozen lake. The ice cracked, but we didn't fall through. There's a pause. A few people nod, impressed. One old woman gasps and mutters something about omens. A cousin claps. Your spouse stares at you like you've just performed actual sorcery. It's a hit. You're rewarded with another cup of mead and the privilege of not being questioned again, at least for the next few minutes. Your spouse leans in and murmurs, "Was that real?" You shake your head. "Not even close," they laugh. "Remind me to never play bones with you." So here you are, mid-morning on the day after your wedding, pretending fermented fish isn't stuck between your teeth and hoping no one asks about your childhood next. The fire has been stoked, the smoke is rising again, and the longhouse is filled with that strange kind of post-celebration energy, tired but still buzzing. And here's where the scholarly debate sneaks in. Historians argue about just how raucous these post-wedding feasts got. Some believe they were tight-knit, almost sacred, filled with rituals and precise social expectations. Others insist they were a free-for-all fueled by ale and thinly veiled insults. Most likely they were both sacred chaos, choreographed debauchery, a little like your breakfast. As you lean back on the bench, finally full, finally a bit buzzed, someone places a small wooden bowl of sweetened oats in front of you. A peace offering, perhaps, or a test of digestion. You eat it anyway. By now the firelight dances in your peripheral vision like it's trying to lull you into sleep, but the day is far from over. There's still work to do, and for you and your spouse, it starts now. Because someone just handed you a feeding pail, someone else pointed toward the livestock pen, and no one's letting you rest just because you're technically a newlywed. You look at your spouse, who sighs. First chores? Looks like it. Let's just hope it's not the pig again. Why? You'll see. And just like that, you're off to face your first real task together. Not in a storybook kind of way, but in a muddy, noisy, manure-scented kind of way. Welcome to married life, Viking style. If you thought marriage in a Viking household came with some kind of grace period, like a few days to lounge around and get to know your new spouse while braiding each other's hair and humming old sagas by the hearth, you are sorely mistaken. Because the second the mead haze clears and the last hunk of boar fat is gone, you're tossed headfirst into the living, breathing machine that is Longhouse life. And every cog in that machine expects you to pull your weight. Your new task is simple on paper, help with the morning chores, but in reality it's a game of survival featuring screaming geese, a goat with one horn and a vendetta, and a feeding pail that's leaking in 3 different places. Your spouse hands it to you like a peace offering or a dare, and you take it with the resigned acceptance of someone who has just realised that marital bliss comes with splinters and the occasional faceful of feathers. You follow the clatter of feet and low grunts out to the side structure where the animals are kept. It's less a barn and more a lean-to built from leftover planks and whatever the last storm didn't carry off. Inside, the smell is impressive. Potent blend of damp straw, animal funk, and something sharp and suspicious you can't quite identify. Let's hope it's not prophetic. You step into the pen and are immediately greeted by a goat head-butting your shin. "That's Skeggy," your spouse says. "He hates everyone, but especially new people." Wonderful. Skeggy snorts and backs up for round 2. Most Viking farms weren't sprawling fields and pristine barns. They were compact, efficient ecosystems. If you had animals, you used every part of them, and you learned their habits fast. Chickens provided eggs, pigs were walking food storage units, and goats, well, goats were chaos on 4 legs that sometimes gave milk if they felt generous. Your job, for now, is to keep the chaos contained. You and your spouse move through the motions, pouring grain, refilling water troughs, tossing old hay, trying to dodge hooves and horns. It's clumsy at first. You step left when they step right. You nearly knock over a bucket with your elbow. At one point, a rooster decides your boot looks like a rival and launches an attack. Your spouse swats it away, laughing harder than they probably should. "You're doing great," they say through wheezing laughter. "If this were a saga, you'd be the warrior of the coop." Speaking of sagas, let's hit pause for a little historical detour. Viking Age households valued physical work, not just for survival, but as a measure of your worth. A spouse who couldn't carry their share of chores, or who grumbled too much about the pig pen, would be quietly noted and possibly roasted in next year's winter tale. These stories weren't always about war, some were about domestic strength, cleverness, or the time Uncle Life fell into a well while chasing a sheep and had to marry the girl who pulled him out. And here's a strange but true tidbit. Some Viking women, especially on larger farms, ran the entire household while their husbands were away raiding or trading. They held the keys to the food stores, managed the workers, and even oversaw legal matters. The term housewife didn't mean sits and embroiders back then. It meant probably has a knife and could run the estate better than you. Back in the pen, you're slowly getting the hang of it. Your spouse starts humming as they work, some old tune that loops through the hay, tossing and chicken herding. You join in, off-key but enthusiastic, and the rhythm of the work starts to smooth out. You're not just doing chores now, you're building a rhythm with each other. It's strange, oddly satisfying, like you're becoming part of something larger than yourself. That is, until the pig makes its entrance. You hear it before you see it, a low, guttural grunt, followed by the unmistakable sound of a wooden gate being violently tested. Your spouse freezes. "Oh no," they mutter, "not again." The pig, whose name is apparently Bruni, has escaped its pen and is now trotting directly toward you with the self-confidence of a war chieftain and the eyes of someone who knows exactly how to ruin your morning. He snorts, eyes the leaking pail in your hands, and charges, not to attack but to demand breakfast. What follows is not dignified. You try to dodge left. Bruni charges right. You slip on a patch of wet straw and nearly take out a chicken coop. Your spouse tries to intercept with a stick, but the pig, slippery and smarter than expected, jukes them like a seasoned gladiator. In the end, it takes both of you pinning the pig between two barrels to get him back in his pen, panting and covered in something you hope is just mud. You lean against the wall, exhausted. Your spouse offers you a bucket of water to rinse off. You survived Bruni, they say, clearly impressed. Most people don't get that far on day one. You're about to make a joke about it being a test when one of the older women from the house appears with a stern look and a broom. "The dung's piling up near the door," she says flatly. "Newlyweds get the honour." You don't know whether to laugh or cry, so you just sigh, pick up the broom, and trudge toward your next chore. This is the part of marriage no one sings about. No romantic ballads for pig wrestling and dung sweeping. But it's here, in the shared mess, that something important starts to form. Respect. Not flashy, not poetic, but solid. Real. Your spouse looks at you like you've passed some invisible trial. You look at them and realizes they were right there with you, broom in hand, shoulder to shoulder. Here's where historians have a little tug of war. Some argue that Viking marriages were strictly utilitarian. Cold economic exchanges. Others point to sagas and archaeological evidence suggesting that, while arranged, many couples developed real companionship over time. Judging by the way your spouse just handed you a second bucket without mocking your broom grip, maybe there's something to that second theory. Eventually the animals are fed, the dung is mostly swept, and your hands are raw from rope and wood. You return to the longhouse with your clothes damp, your hair plastered to your forehead, and a new appreciation for how fast a pig can move. Someone offers you a seat near the fire. Another hands you a warm cup of something sweetened with berries. Your spouse sits beside you, nudging your elbow gently. The longhouse smells less like smoke now, and more like roasted barley and pine. The fire pops softly. For a moment you let yourself sink into the bench and breathe. You're married. You're muddy. And for the first time all day, you don't feel entirely like an outsider. Not yet part of the woodwork, but getting there. Slowly. By the time your hands stop aching from pig wrangling and straw sweeping, you're pretty sure you've earned a short nap. Or at least a few minutes to zone out while staring into the fire and contemplating the meaning of goat behaviour. But no, Viking marriage, much like a Viking feast, does not pause just because you're covered in dirt and existential dread. The longhouse is still buzzing, and the guests from the wedding, yes, they're still here, are determined to keep the party going. Turns out day after feasting isn't just for leftovers, it's also prime time for storytelling, bragging, and most importantly, gossip. And not just any gossip, wedding gossip. As you ease back onto the bench and sip a warm cup of something fermented but still somehow sour, you catch snippets all around you, bits of conversation bouncing off the walls like arrows loosed from a very nosy quiver. I heard they didn't even finish the wedding song last night. The cousin got too drunk and started chanting about fish. Did you see the bride's aunt? She fell asleep face first in the oatcakes. I heard the dowry included a cursed brooch. My grandmother swears she saw it twitch. You look at your spouse, who shrugs like this is all normal, and maybe it is, because Viking gatherings weren't just about food and celebration, they were also about memory, specifically shaping memory. These stories, these little exaggerated tales and awkward retellings, they're already becoming folklore, your folklore. A man with a spectacularly long moustache, so long it has its own braid, plops down next to you and leans in conspiratorially. "So," he says, breath thick with onions and ancient mead, "which one of you passed out first last night?" You blink. He grins. "Come on, don't be shy, there's a wager going." You don't answer, but your spouse raises an eyebrow and says, "Neither. We had to carry you out of the stew pot." Moustache man howls with laughter and shouts, "Fair enough," before stumbling away, presumably to confirm whether he really did nap in the pot. This apparently is the game now. Who can retell the wedding in the funniest, most humiliating, or most mythically inaccurate way? And you and your spouse are centre stage. No pressure. A young woman with wild hair and a jug of something dangerously cloudy takes her turn next. "I saw the couple sneak out right before midnight," she says loudly, addressing the room more than either of you. They said it was for privacy, but I'm pretty sure they just wanted to steal more honey cakes. Several people laugh. A few nod solemnly, as if this is a confirmed crime. Your spouse whispers, "I did steal honey cakes." You whisper back, "I know, you stuffed them in my sleeve." You're not sure if you should feel embarrassed or oddly proud, but there's a strange comfort in hearing people talk about you like this, as if your presence is no longer foreign, no longer something new to be evaluated. You're becoming part of the house's tapestry, woven in with jokes and rumours and crumbs. Historically speaking, Viking society was intensely oral. Stories weren't just for entertainment, they were how people remembered things, how they passed down values, how they judged what mattered. Your wedding, in all its mud-stained, mead-drenched glory, is now public property, and these tales, embellished or not, will follow you for years. Now here's a quirky little historical detail. Some Viking wedding feasts included game rituals, where guests reenacted parts of the couple's courtship or pretended to be them in satirical skits. These were usually harmless fun, but occasionally veered into very specific territory. If you're lucky, this household doesn't lean theatrical. Just as that thought crosses your mind, two boys scramble into the centre of the longhouse and announce that they are performing the Saga of the Newlyweds. Oh no, the taller one smears dirt on his face and wraps a wool blanket around his shoulders like a cloak. "I am the spouse," he bellows, striking a heroic pose. The smaller boy flops dramatically to the floor and groans, "The pigs! They were so many!" You stare in horror as the boys reenact your exact pig-chasing scene, complete with exaggerated squeals, a pretend bucket, and a broom-wielding elder yelling, "Clean it better!" Everyone erupts into laughter. You bury your face in your hands. Your spouse, traitorously, is laughing harder than anyone else. When the play ends, someone tosses the boys a pair of dried apples as payment, and the older woman who plays the lyre strums a few celebratory notes. You've officially been immortalised in barnyard theatre. Despite the embarrassment, it's weirdly bonding. These people, who just yesterday were strangers, are laughing with you now, not at you. Well, okay, a little bit at you, but there's affection in it. Acceptance. Your spouse leans in and says, "If it helps, that's the best pig impression I've seen all year." You smile reluctantly. Better than the real thing? Oh, not that good. Eventually the laughter dies down and people start shifting into more comfortable positions, and some sprawl on furs near the fire. Others begin rebraiding their hair or tightening their wool wraps. The room settles into that soft post-feast lull where the smoke hangs low and everyone feels slightly heavier in the best possible way. One woman, your spouse's cousin maybe, starts a new story, this time about her own wedding, which apparently involved a blizzard, a runaway sled, and a reindeer named Olaf. The tale is wild and likely only 40% true, but no one cares. Truth is negotiable here, as long as it's entertaining. And here's a point of historical debate. How accurate were these tales, really? Some historians believe Viking oral history was surprisingly precise, especially for major events. Others argue that most of it was flexible storytelling designed to boost reputations and entertain long winters. Probably, as with most things, it was both. A little fact, a little flair, and a lot of repetition, until even the pig story sounds like prophecy. By the time the lyre plays again and a few sleepy guests start yawning into their cloaks, you and your spouse are leaning comfortably together. It's not romantic exactly, it's companionable, warm, like two people who survived something mildly traumatic and came out the other side as co-owners of a goat-infested memory. One last cousin stumbles over and mumbles, "You'll be fine. If you can laugh, you can last." Then she hiccups and curls up under the nearest bench. You look at your spouse. Do you think we're fine? They think for a moment, then nod. We're covered in pig muck and lies. We're thriving. You both laugh again, quieter this time, softer. The longhouse is dim now, the fire's dimmer, and the gossip has faded into gentle murmurs. For tonight at least, the household seems content to let you be. You've been hazed, teased, performed and parodied. And weirdly enough, it feels like home. Sleep sounds like a brilliant idea right about now. After surviving livestock gossip and the theatrical retelling of your first full day of married life, you'd think someone would throw you a blanket and let you collapse into your straw mattress for a hard-earned nap. But no, before your body even finishes the thought of rest, a sharp whistle slices through the longhouse, and an older woman, wide-shouldered, grey-brayed, eyes like a hawk, points directly at you and says, "Time for work." You look to your spouse for help, but they're already grabbing a wooden pail and walking toward the back of the house like this is all normal. And of course it is normal. Welcome to your first official domestic duty as a married Viking. No fanfare, no ceremony, just hands in buckets and a strong chance of accidentally stepping in something that once used to be food. You trail behind your spouse as the older woman, who, by the way, turns out to be the household's keeper of rhythm, which is less poetic and more unofficial manager of literally everything, begins rattling off chores in a tone that suggests she once raised wolves and probably still keeps their bones as bookmarks. "You," she says to you, handing over a broom made from bundled birch branches, "sweep the hearth area and under the benches. Ashes go to the pit, scraps to the pigs. No crumbs in the fire. Fire spirits hate crumbs." You blink. "The fire spirits?" She squints at you like you've just asked if water is optional. Of course, you don't want to anger them. Noted. Your spouse, meanwhile, has been assigned to the drying racks, tasked with checking the smoked fish and flipping the flatbreads. There's no instruction manual, no list, just this smooth rhythm that everyone else seems to know instinctively. You, on the other hand, are trying to figure out where the hearth ash goes without angering invisible spirits or your new in-laws. Viking households, it turns out, ran on a system of deeply ingrained domestic rituals, many of which weren't written down but passed on through repetition and a fair amount of passive-aggressive sighing. Every task had a right way to be done, some of them rooted in superstition, others in simple practicality. For example, ashes were often saved to make lye soap, but if you dumped them too close to the woodpile, someone would believe you'd invited misfortune or accidentally insulted a local ancestor, because that's a thing. You sweep carefully, trying not to scatter soot or overthink the fire spirits. As you work, you notice how the household breathes around you, how people slide past one another, how the noise ebbs and flows. A child shouts about missing sandals, someone coughs behind a curtain, and a dog sniffs at a bowl of potato skins with the deep concentration of a scholar reading ancient runes. This house, you realise, is alive. Not just in the metaphorical sense. It's truly busy, packed with living bodies, layered smells, creaking wood and constant activity. There's a never-ending list of things that need tending. Churns to stir, cloth to patch, arrows to fletch, tools to clean. Nothing is idle here. Even the sleeping seem to do it with purpose. You pass your spouse, who's carefully flipping a dried fish over the fire. "How are you doing?" they ask. "Honestly? Terrified I'll sweep in the wrong direction and summon a vengeful ghost?" They smirk. "Only if you sweep toward the north wall." You stop mid-motion. Joking, they add quickly. Mostly. This was the unspoken contract of Viking marriage. Shared work, shared food, shared fire. And sometimes shared curses when someone forgot to knock on wood or offer a coin to the house spirit. These duties weren't divided by love, but by survival. In many Viking homes, especially on isolated farms, marriage meant becoming functional co-workers. There was affection, sure, but the primary concern was, can you keep the hearth running? Can you keep the children alive? Can you store enough salted herring to make it through February? And if you think it's just drudgery, here's a strange twist. Some scholars argue that the drudgery was the intimacy, that the shared daily grind, the sweeping, the milking, the winter prep, was where bonds actually formed. Not during ceremonial feasts or epic sea voyages, but while elbow-deep in sheep dung and arguing over whether the good ladle got buried again. You finish sweeping and carry the ash outside, careful to toss it toward the midden heap, and not the sacred grove, where apparently someone once buried a cat and now claims it haunts anyone who pees too close to the elder tree. You make a mental note: no peeing near trees. Or maybe just no peeing at all, unless supervised. Back inside, your spouse is now helping repair a torn wool tunic. They motion you over, and before you know it, you're sitting beside them, holding the fabric steady while they stitch. Your fingers are still dirty, your back aches, but for the first time since this whole thing began, you're doing something together that doesn't involve embarrassment, bloodstains, or flying poultry. "This used to be my uncle's," they say quietly, threading the needle. "He gave it to me when I left home." You nod. "Looks warm." "It was." A pause. "He died last winter, fell through the ice, we only found his boots." There's nothing poetic about it, nothing dramatic, just a quiet memory shared over a half-mended seam. And somehow that honesty feels more intimate than anything else you've experienced today. Here's a fringe fact for you. In some Viking households, a newly married couple's first full day of labour was considered sacred. The tasks they did together were believed to set the tone for their entire marriage. Some couples even chose which chores to tackle first deliberately, hoping the symbolism would stick. Planting together meant growth. Tending the hearth meant warmth. Killing a chicken together probably meant constant arguing. So what does sweeping ashes and mending old clothes mean? Maybe it means you're practical. Maybe it means you're survivors. Eventually the room starts to quiet. People finish their chores. The air shifts toward evening mode. Meals being prepared. Fires being stoked again. Younger children yawning dramatically, as if sleep is something they must be coaxed into. You and your spouse finish the tunic, fold it carefully, and return it to a peg near the door. You sit down together near the fire, your bodies heavy but content. The bench creaks under your combined weight. You've earned this rest. Not given, not requested, but earned. No one applauds, no one thanks you, but the looks you get from the others now aren't curious or suspicious anymore. They're just normal, as if you've always been here. Your spouse nudges your shoulder gently. "We made it through chore day." Barely. But still, you smile. "Let's see if we can survive dinner." Because in a Viking household, even eating can be an ordeal. You're still peeling straw out of your sleeves when the call for the evening gathering ripples through the longhouse like smoke. Casual, inevitable, and impossible to ignore. A woman with arms thicker than most tree trunks bangs a carved spoon against a wooden bowl 3 times. That's the signal. Time for the post-wedding gift exchange. You glance at your spouse, hoping they'll say something like, "We can skip it," or "Let's run away to the fjords." Instead, they stand, stretch, and say, "Don't forget your comb." Right. The sheepbone comb, the one your cousin insisted would make a perfectly practical gift for someone who already has everything, including lice. You'd laughed at the time, now you clutch it like it's made of gold and your social survival depends on it, because it kind of does. You follow your spouse toward the hearth, where the circle is already forming. This isn't a formal, sacred gifting ritual like at a birth or funeral. It's looser, messier, half feast, half presentation, and entirely political. People will be giving and receiving gifts as gestures of goodwill, obligation, or subtle dominance. It's less about what you give and more about what it says. The first gifts are exchanged between elders. Hand-carved ladles, woven belts, small pouches of dried herbs that might be healing, or might just be leaves someone found and blessed under a full moon. A wiry man presents a pair of leather boots that he claims were worn by a real berserker before he gave up the axe for beekeeping. Everyone nods as if this is completely normal. Then comes your turn. Your spouse gestures toward the gathered family and whispers, "Start with Aunt Gudrun. She controls the food stores, and my cousin Svala. She makes the linen. After that, anyone with a visible weapon probably deserves a token." Great. Food, fabric, and fear. You take a deep breath and step forward with the comb in hand. It's humble, carved with a simple knotwork pattern. No fancy stones, no precious metals. You offer it to Aunt Gudrun, who accepts it with a nod and squints at you like she's trying to measure your soul through your gift-giving instincts. "Bone?" she asks. "Sheep," you say. "Good. Cow's too soft, goat smells." She tucks it into her cloak like a precious heirloom and pats your shoulder hard enough to dislocate a lesser person's collarbone. You did well. Next is Svala the linen maker, a quiet woman who hasn't spoken more than 3 words to you. You hand her a pair of embroidered cuffs, made by your younger sister and passed to you last minute. They're crude but colourful, and Svala's eyes widen slightly as she fingers the stitching. She mutters, "Decent," then slips them into her satchel and hands you a small bundle wrapped in hide. You open it to reveal a spindle whorl, perfectly balanced, carved with runes, and smooth as river stone. It's beautiful, it's useful, it's an investment. She's given you a tool for weaving, which means she expects fabric in return. You've just been roped into a trade agreement. Welcome to Viking politics. One by one, you pass out the few gifts you'd brought, bits of antler, carved trinkets, small bags of dried juniper berries, and in return you receive everything from a carved spoon to a half-burned candle to what you think might be a fertility charm shaped like a very enthusiastic horse. Gifts in Viking culture weren't just tokens, they were social glue. They could be favours owed, alliances confirmed, or debts postponed. A gift was never just a gift. It was a statement. I see you, I value you, and I now have a reason to knock on your door when I need help hauling lumber or hiding from my cousin who thinks I stole his knife. And here's a curious historical wrinkle. The value of a gift was less about its cost and more about its appropriateness. Give something too lavish and people might think you were showing off. Too cheap and they'd think you didn't care. But a well-chosen, practical, personalised item, that could secure you a friend for life, or at least through the next bad winter. You finish your rounds, tuck your now nearly empty pouch into your belt, and find your way back to your spouse, who's holding a woven basket filled with their own haul. They show you a small copper pin in the shape of a fish, from the smith's daughter. She said it's for luck. Then lower. She also asked if we were planning to have kids soon. Of course she did. You sit together on the bench as the last gifts are passed around. A boy hands his grandmother a clay figure that looks like either a dog or a misshapen bear. She calls it perfect, then starts using it to hold down her napkin. An older man gives your spouse a small jar of bear fat, claiming it's good for everything from joint pain to marriage arguments. Just smear it, he says. You nod seriously, because what else can you... Here's your quirky Viking-era fact for the night. In some Scandinavian communities, gifts were expected to be returned, not physically, but with something of equal or greater value. Eventually. This practice kept the social wheel spinning. You gave, you received, and you gave again. To not return a gift in time was a subtle insult, one that might not be spoken aloud but would certainly be remembered. So you sit, inventorying your haul in your head, the spindle, the fish pin, the bear fat, the semi-crude fertility horse, a leather strap that might be a belt or possibly a dog collar, all symbols of your entry into this place. You are being measured, piece by piece, judged by what you give, what you receive, and how you respond to both. A quiet falls over the room as the last fire log is placed. The air smells of smoke, pine afriko, and roasted onion. One of the older guests begins a quiet song, just a simple melody, low and rhythmic, about ships and stars and returning home. Others join in, their voices weaving like threads through the smoky air. You don't know the words, but your spouse leans in and whispers them into your ear, line by line. You hum along, and after a while your voice finds its place. Soft, uncertain, but present. And that's what this whole thing feels like now. You're finding your place in a song that started long before you arrived. As the fire crackles and the gifting circle breaks, someone tosses a blanket your way. You catch it. Thick wool, scratchy but warm. A quiet gift, but with no label or ceremony. You glance around to see who threw it, but no one makes eye contact. Maybe it doesn't matter. Your spouse smiles. Looks like someone thinks you're worth keeping warm. You wrap the blanket around your shoulders and lean into them just a little. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to say, I'm still here. And for the first time all day you feel something that isn't survival, duty or fatigue. You feel welcome. The hearth fire has burned low, sputtering gently in the round stone pit as the last log settles with a quiet crack. Most of the guests have either left or tucked themselves into corners of the longhouse for the night, wrapped in cloaks, arms crossed over their chests like half-sentient burritos. You're nearly asleep, cheek pressed to your folded arms, when a bony hand taps your shoulder. Not softly, with purpose. You blink up at a man with cheeks like withered apples and eyes that reflect the firelight too brightly. He's dressed in a cloak lined with raven feathers and has a carved staff clutched in one gnarled hand. You've seen him lurking around the edges of the room since the wedding, but he hasn't said much until now. "The weather's changing," he says, staring directly into your soul, "and we should ask the clouds if your union will survive." You sit up, very much awake now. "I'm sorry, we're asking the clouds." Your spouse, who'd also been drifting off beside you, groans quietly. "Don't argue. Just follow him. It's the luck thing." "The luck thing?" "Every new couple gets weather red. It's tradition. You don't want to be the only marriage in the village that didn't ask a raven mage about cloud formations, do you?" Of course not. So still wrapped in your newly gifted blanket and bleary with exhaustion, you rise and follow the cloaked elder out into the cold night. The door creaks, the wind bites, and the sky above stretches wide and endless, a deep indigo sea scattered with stars and half covered by creeping clouds. The moon hangs low, dull and indifferent. He leads you to the centre of the village clearing, where a small pile of stones marks an old meeting place. He doesn't sit, he just stands and squints upward like the clouds owe him money. "North wind," he mutters. "That's good for grain, not so great for patience." You nod like that makes sense. He sniffs the air. "Clouds are long tonight, stretched thin. That means endurance, or indecision. Could go either way." Your spouse leans in and whispers. He once predicted a couple's first child would be a sheep. They actually found a lamb on their bed a week later. You're not sure whether to laugh or run. The elder continues his atmospheric analysis with the solemnity of a high priest conducting surgery. He waves his staff, gestures to the sky, and mutters something under his breath. Probably ancient wisdom, possibly a list of dinner complaints. Then he turns to you and delivers his verdict. "You'll have 3 winters of closeness, then a long silence, but after that fire again." You blink. "Is that good?" "Better than hail. Worse than mist." He nods once, then wanders away toward the woods, staff clicking against the stones as he vanishes into the dark like a goat-scented ghost. You stand there, blinking up at the clouds, unsure what you're supposed to feel. The cold starts to creep through your boots. Your spouse reaches for your hand. "Could be worse," they say. "He once told a couple their love would be like spoiled milk, thick and sour." You snort. "At least we got fire." Eventually. The two of you walk back toward the longhouse, footsteps soft on the frozen dirt. The wind has picked up slightly, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something sharper. Metal, maybe. The stars glimmer hard above you, like tiny eyes watching from behind a veil. This, oddly enough, was not unheard of in Viking communities. Weather reading and divination were often part of everyday decisions, especially big ones like marriages, travel, or crop planting. Sky gazing was both science and superstition, with cloud shapes, bird flight, and wind patterns read like divine scripts. And the people who did the reading? Usually old, usually a little eccentric, and absolutely treated with respect. Because you never knew when they'd be right. Some scholars debate how widespread these practices really were. Did every village have its own weather prophet? Or were they more of a special occasion feature, like bear fur cloaks or feasts with actual fruit? The records are vague, but there's enough overlap in saga tales to suggest these mystical moments weren't that unusual, especially when people were desperate for meaning, in a world where frost could kill a harvest and a sneeze might mean the gods were annoyed. You step back into the longhouse and are immediately hit by the warmth, the smell of damp wool, and the low hum of a household drifting toward rest. Your bed curtain waits in the corner, folded back slightly like an open mouth. You and your spouse duck inside, curling up beneath the shared fur blanket with the ease of 2 people who have already seen too much goat for one day. There's a comfortable silence between you now. Not awkward, not heavy, just quiet, shared. You stare at the beams above you, tracing the rough edges of the wood grain with your eyes. Your spouse shifts beside you and whispers, 3 winters of closeness sounds manageable. Better than spoiled milk. Way better. You lie there a while longer, warm and still, listening to the longhouse breathe. Somewhere someone is snoring like a dying bear. A baby fusses on the far end, soothed quickly by a lullaby, sung in a voice rough from age. Someone knocks over a pot in their sleep. It's not peaceful exactly, but it's real. And here's a curious fringe belief from the Viking world. It was said that if you heard the wind whistle through the longhouse chimney in a steady tone, it meant the gods were listening. Tonight, the wind doesn't whistle. It hums, low, even, as if it's carrying something away. Not quite a prayer, but close enough. You feel your spouse's hand brush against yours under the fur. You don't say anything. You don't need to. Out there, the clouds shift. The wind turns slightly west. Somewhere in the distance, an owl cries out once, sharp and solitary. Whatever tomorrow brings, chores, pigs, politics, or prophecy, you'll face it together. For now you sleep, and you wake before the fire, before the birds, before the longhouse even creaks back to life. It's cold, the kind of cold that lives in the bones of the floor and curls under your blanket like a second, less welcome bedmate. Your breath puffs out in little clouds as you sit up and listen to the silence. Not true silence, of course. There's always the soft stir of sleeping bodies, the slow drip of thawing ice from the beams, the subtle rhythmic snort of a pig somewhere dreaming about conquest. But for the first time in days, no one's yelling your name or handing you a broom. Your spouse is still asleep, a mop of tangled hair half buried under the fur. You pull your cloak tighter and slip out of the curtain to stoke the fire, your fingers already stiff. Coals glow faintly, like little red eyes peeking out from yesterday's ash. You breathe onto them and coax the flames back to life, and as the fire flares, the warmth spreads. Not just physically, but symbolically. You've done it. You're part of the rhythm now, and that rhythm has another beat to offer today. By the time the others stir, you're already helping distribute warm broth into cracked wooden bowls, steam rising like ghost stories from the fire. Your spouse joins you, bleary-eyed but smiling. Big day, they murmur. Time to meet the dead. You blink. Excuse me? They just nudge you gently toward the door. We visit the ancestors today. Grave mound walk, blessing, or asking forgiveness, depending on what kind of person you married. Great. Outside, the morning air bites hard and crisp, but the sky is clear. A group begins to gather near the edge of the village, some carrying torches, others bundles of dried herbs or food wrapped in cloth. One older man even holds a wooden bowl filled with porridge. For the ancestors, he says solemnly. They like a hot breakfast. Your spouse takes your hand, and suddenly this feels bigger than another odd tradition. This isn't gossip or goat herding. This is spiritual, sacred, serious. The walk to the family grave mound isn't long, but it's slow. Everyone moves with intention. The burial site sits on a low rise overlooking the fjord, ringed by a line of standing stones, half buried in snow and moss. The ground is uneven, pocked with the centuries-long shuffle of feet and offerings and bones. You can feel the weight of it, the stories, the losses, the memories laid under these stones like seeds. Each couple takes their turn stepping forward. They place their offerings on the ground, whisper something you can't hear, and then stand in silence for a few heartbeats before stepping back. No one rushes, no one speaks above a whisper. Even the children are quiet, their fidgeting stilled by the presence of something ancient in the air. When it's your turn, your spouse hands you a small satchel filled with grain and herbs. We offer it together, they say. You walk together toward the mound, and despite the cold, your palms sweat. The earth here feels awake, not threatening, but alert, as if it's listening. You kneel and place the offering near a stone carved with weathered runes. Your spouse murmurs a prayer in Old Norse, something about guidance, memory, and not repeating the mistakes of Uncle Bjorn. Then they look at you. Say something. You hesitate. What do you say to people you've never met who also happen to be dead and potentially judging your posture? I don't know your names, you begin quietly, but I know your bones are here. I'm married to one of yours now, and I'd like to not ruin it. It's simple, honest. The wind shifts. A tiny swirl of snow lifts off the mound like a breath. Your spouse gives you a small nod. That'll do. Historically, grave mound visits weren't uncommon in Viking life. Ancestors were seen as part of the household still, offering wisdom, protection, and sometimes a much-needed guilt trip if the cows weren't milked on time. Marriages, especially new ones, were occasions to strengthen that invisible line of family continuity. You weren't just joining a house, you were entering its legacy. One particularly curious belief found in some sagas held that grave mounds could listen, that they absorbed the words and emotions of the living, and in return offered dreams, signs, or warnings. Sometimes blessings came in the form of a well-timed rain. Other times, a very specific owl showing up 3 days in a row. You don't know how your little speech landed, but the sky hasn't cracked open yet. That's probably a good sign. As you step back, another family approaches. You watch them with new eyes now, not just as people, but as links in a chain that stretches backward and forward in time. Someone hands you a warm cup of mead. Not celebration mead. This is the serious, herby kind that tastes like it could knock out a fever and make you dream of wolves. "Did they like you?" your spouse asks as you sip. You nod. "I think they're giving me a week to prove I'm not a disaster." They smile. That's more than most people get. The group begins to head back, walking slow and steady. You catch snippets of murmured stories, someone recalling their grandmother's voice, someone else talking about a sword buried with an uncle who once tried to marry a ghost. These aren't just memories, there are conversations, ongoing ones, and now you're part of that too. Back in the village, the mood is softer, more settled. There's food on the fire, something thick and peppery that clings to the air like comfort. You help stir the pot with a worn wooden spoon, your arms aching in that good solid way that means you've done something. The others trickle in, slowly reclaiming their usual places, like puzzle pieces sliding back into position. Your spouse pulls you aside and places a hand on your chest. "Today matters," they say. "Now you're really woven in." You nod. To the family. To the story. Later, when the sun dips low and the light turns gold against the snow, you find yourself sitting beside a child who asks, "Did the ancestors say anything?" You smile. They said to behave, or they'll send Bruni the pig as their messenger. The child gasps in horror. "Not Bruni!" You laugh, and it echoes gently in the longhouse, blending with the rising voices, the clink of bowls, the hiss of logs settling. The dead may be quiet, but the living carry their songs. And tonight, one of those songs includes you. You're stirring a bowl of cabbage stew that smells vaguely like feet and wet rope when the shouting starts. Not angry shouting yet, but the kind that carries just a little too much energy. You glance up from the hearth just in time to see two people stumble in through the longhouse door, arguing loudly about goats. Again with the goats. Your spouse is already rising from the bench with a groan. "I swear, if this is about the brown one again..." It is about the brown one again. Turns out today is the day you get to witness, maybe even star in, your first real marital argument. Not yours and your spouse's, though that's coming soon enough, but between two other newlyweds from a neighbouring village. They're visiting for the post-wedding cycle, as is tradition, and they've arrived mid-fight, mid-freeze, and fully ready to drag their domestic drama into the sacred domain of your still, simmering soup. The argument goes something like this. "She's my goat. My father gave her to us." "Your father gave us a goat. I have fed her, cleaned up after her, brushed her every god's cursed day." She responds to my voice, because you yell at her like a lunatic. You try to shrink into the shadows, but it's too late. The fire flickers dramatically, as if eager to cast mood lighting. Every head in the longhouse slowly turns toward the couple, and the air thickens with one unspoken sentiment. Here we go, Yoko. Your spouse leans in and murmurs, "They do this everywhere they go. Last week they argued about whose turn it was to sharpen the hay knife. Loud enough that the blacksmith's wife threatened to relocate them to the pig pen. This is your initiation into another important part of Viking marriage, public disputes. In this world, marriage doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a longhouse full of in-laws, neighbours, livestock and nosy children pretending not to listen. Privacy isn't just rare, it's a luxury. And if you and your partner have a disagreement, chances are someone else is going to weigh in. Or three someone else's. Possibly the entire village, if the shouting lasts long enough. The goat fight escalates. Someone knocks over a stool. Someone else gasps as though the gods themselves have just been insulted. The woman insists that she's done the bulk of the caring, and the man counters by accusing her of stealing affection that rightly belongs to both. The goat, for the record, is outside somewhere, chewing on a fence post and completely unbothered. Now, here's the interesting part. No one tells them to stop, not at first anyway, because open disagreements between spouses were not only tolerated in Viking society, they were expected. Marriage was seen as a partnership, and like any partnership, it included conflict. The difference was that these arguments weren't hidden, they were witnessed. The community didn't just watch, they monitored, listened, sometimes even voted on the outcome. You realise this when the elder woman with the iron brooch stands, clears her throat and says loudly, What do we know about the brown goat's origins? The crowd turns to her like she's about to read a royal decree. She points to you. You? You're new. Neutral. Help settle this. Panic. You freeze, spoon halfway to your mouth. Your spouse nudges you. Just say something wise or weird. Both usually work. You stand slowly, wrap your cloak around you like it might deflect blame, and say, "A goat who listens to no one belongs to no one. She chooses her own path." Silence. Then from the shadows a voice mutters, "She did headbutt the priest last spring." Laughter breaks the tension. The arguing couple glance at each other, slightly sheepish now. The woman huffs. "Fine, shared goat, but I get to name the kid if she births one." The man nods. "Deal." Just like that, it's over. You sit down again, hands shaking slightly from your unexpected moment as Goat Solomon. Your spouse grins and hands you a chunk of bread. "You're a natural. You're going to do great when it's our turn." You raise an eyebrow. "Our turn? Oh, you think we're going to go the whole winter without a fight?" They laugh. "We're just waiting for the right topic." And right on cue, someone stumbles by and drops a cloak on the fire tongs. Your fire tongs. You glare. Your spouse shrugs. "Maybe that'll be it." But it won't be today. Today you've just gotten a front row seat to how Viking marriages didn't just live under the gaze of community. They relied on it. Conflict resolution wasn't always about compromise. Sometimes it was about public accountability. You couldn't scream in private and pretend everything was fine in public. Everyone already knew. And if your arguments got too intense, too constant, there was a word for that. Ill-spoused. It wasn't just shameful, it could be to grounds for a separation. Which brings us to a scholarly debate. How much authority did the community have in personal matters like marriage arguments? Some evidence suggests informal marriage courts where elders mediated disputes. Others argue that it was more organic, handled by social pressure and the threat of public embarrassment. Judging by today, the latter seems likely. No gavel needed when a dozen aunties can end your relationship with a single raised eyebrow. You finish your stew slowly, watching the firelight dance over the now quiet longhouse. The goat couple sits side by side again, not quite touching, but clearly no longer ready to kill each other. Someone hums softly from the far bench, a calming tune that snakes around the room like warm smoke. Your spouse reaches for your hand. "Promise me something," they say. You look over. "Anything." When it's our turn to fight, we keep it weird. Make 'em laugh, confuse 'em with metaphors. You grin. "Deal." You yell about firewood. I'll quote the gods. Perfect. Outside, the wind howls softly against the walls, and the brown goat bleats once. Long, low, and possibly judgmental. You close your eyes, content for now. The fire's hot, the stew's decent, and you've survived your first Viking-style marital spat. By proxy, anyway. Yours is still to come. Morning again, and this time there's blood involved. But don't worry, it's the ritual kind, mostly. You're pulled from sleep by the sharp scent of iron and pine, and a sudden, undeniable sense that today's about to get weird. Your spouse is already dressed, cloak pinned tight, coy, hair braided with fresh bits of greenery. They kneel beside the bed and shake your shoulder with the urgency of someone who has just remembered they promised the gods a favour and it's due today. "Come on," they whisper. "We've got to slaughter something." You blink. What? "The blot. It's sacrifice day. First one together, we have to be there." And just like that, you're up and dressed and stumbling out into the bitter morning with your belt half buckled and 1,000 questions scrambling around in your head. One thing's immediately clear. This isn't just another chore. This is a moment. A spiritual, messy, deeply symbolic moment that involves knives, chanting, and a strong stomach. Outside the longhouse, a small crowd has gathered near a clearing at the edge of the trees. There is a makeshift altar built from flat stones, and a wooden bowl carved with runes resting beside it. A young goat stands nearby, tethered and skittish, its wide eyes scanning the people as if it knows exactly what kind of day it's about to have. Someone's burning pine branches in a bowl, and the sweet, choking smoke curls into the cold air like a warning. Your spouse squeezes your hand. We make the offering together. That's the custom. Right. Marriage isn't just about sweeping and soup, it's about shared symbolism. Shared blood, apparently. Historically, blots were essential to Viking life. They were sacrifices, sometimes animal, sometimes mead. sometimes even carved wooden figures offered to the gods, spirits, or ancestors to ensure protection, fertility, luck, or just plain survival. Some were held at seasonal festivals, others marked important personal milestones, like births, deaths, or, yes, marriages. And you're now part of the ritual, whether your stomach likes it or not. The officiant today is a woman with silver hair, a serious brow, and a cloak made from something that once had claws. She holds a carved staff and a knife with a bone handle, both worn smooth from decades of use. Her eyes settle on you and your spouse. "Newly joined," she says, voice low and firm. "Come forward." The goat bleats softly, not in fear, more in boredom, as if it too has been through this before. You kneel together beside the altar. The officiant dips her hand into a small bowl of dark red paint, thankfully not actual blood, at least not this early, and presses her palm against your forehead, then your spouse's. "To bond you with the old ways," she says, "to make your names heard by the gods." You nod solemnly, even though you're mostly focused on not passing out. The knife gleams in the sunlight. Then the real sacrifice begins. The goat is brought forward, soothed, calmed. It doesn't resist. Your spouse murmurs something under their breath, possibly a prayer, possibly an apology. The knife is swift, and the act itself is cleaner than you expected. No flailing, no screaming, just a sharp moment, then stillness. The officiant catches the blood in a wide bowl and mixes it with herbs, chanting words in a dialect so old it might predate the runes carved into the stones nearby. You're handed a sprig of evergreen dipped in the blood mixture. You glance at your spouse. They nod. Together, you flick it toward the altar stones, just once, clean and quiet. It's done. You stand, heart thudding. The officiant says something about Frey and fertility, Thor and strength, Frigg and enduring marriage. Then she places a small piece of red-dyed wool into your palm. "Keep this," she says, "for when your bond is tested." You don't know if she means tested spiritually, emotionally, or by an unusually clever pig, but you nod and tuck the wool into your belt pouch. Here's a quirky detail scholars still argue about. How personal were these rituals really? Were they deeply spiritual events tailored to each couple, or more standardized community ceremonies wrapped in tradition? The sagas offer both. Some marriages are sealed with elaborate, almost theatrical blots. Others barely mention anything beyond a toast. Maybe, like everything else, it depended on the people, the family, the gods they feared most. Afterward, the community gathers for a quiet feast. Bread, cheese, dried fish, and hot mead. It's not a party, it's a recognition. A way of saying, we saw your offering, we see your union, and now we move forward. Your spouse unwraps a packet of smoked eel and offers you the better half. "So," they say casually, "how do you feel about sacrificing for our future?" You smirk. "I already gave up half my blanket." They laugh. "The gods will remember that." You eat slowly, soaking in the warmth of the mead and the steady murmurs of the crowd. No one's telling jokes. No one's challenging each other to poetry duels or shouting about goats. It's reverent, heavy in a good way. And here's the thing no one tells you. Rituals like these don't make sense at first. They don't come with instruction manuals or subtitles, but you feel them. The gravity, the history, the rhythm passed down in blood and song, and the quiet moments where eyes meet over a shared bowl of food. When the fire burns low and the sun has begun its lazy winter descent, you and your spouse return to the longhouse. Neither of you speaks for a while. There's nothing to say, not because there's tension, but because silence belongs here. It fills the space like incense, like memory. Later that night, while folding the fur blankets and rubbing warmth back into your fingers, your spouse pulls out the red wool charm and tucks it beneath the shared chest. "Why there?" you ask. "Because when we argue about firewood or whose turn it is to clean the fish guts, I want to remember we offered blood first." You nod. That's fair. They smile, soft and tired. Welcome to the god's side of marriage. Outside, snow begins to fall, quiet, slow, patient. The kind of snow that doesn't announce itself, just arrives. Like traditions, like sacrifices, like love. So you're thinking, okay, that's probably the climax, right? Blood sacrifice, mystical wool charm, emotional bonding moment. What could possibly follow that? And the answer, as it turns out, is sore feet. Lots of them. Because the Viking version of a honeymoon? It's not a trip to the coast or a cozy weekend alone. No, it's a working week. Your romantic getaway consists of frostbitten toes, hand-calloused chores, and awkward silences filled with the distant squawk of chickens. Welcome to your honeymoon. The morning after the blot, you rise with the house barely rested and still smelling faintly of smoked goat. Your spouse hands you a cloak with all the ceremony of someone offering a battlefield map and says, "We're spending the week at my uncle's stead." You pause mid-stretch. Why? They need help mending the fence and turning the soil for spring. It's tradition. Tradition to what? Leave immediately and start building other people's fences. Tradition to be seen together. Working. Contributing. Making rounds. You blink at them slowly. So it's a public honeymoon tour where we do other people's chores? Exactly. And off you go. The path to your spouse's uncle's stead is a few hours' walk, which wouldn't be so bad if you weren't carrying a sack full of dried fish, hard cheese, and what feels like several rocks disguised as oatcakes. The snow crunches underfoot with every step, the wind slices through the trees like a bored god, and somewhere along the way you realise your left boot has developed a personality and a vendetta. Your spouse, of course, walks like they were born part elk. They point out trees, landmarks, old trails, and once the skull of a sheep that supposedly died from too much enthusiasm. They tell stories as you walk, mostly about relatives who live ahead, including a cousin who once tried to court a shield maiden by wrestling a bear. You can't tell if the story ends in marriage or mauling, and honestly you're too cold to ask. Eventually the trees part, and the stead comes into view, a cluster of low buildings framed by snow-drifted fences and the smell of burning peat. You're welcomed with mild surprise and several layers of passive-aggressive politeness, which you've come to recognise as the standard greeting for any Viking in-law situation. "Ah," says the uncle, whose eyebrows could qualify as separate animals. "So this is the new spouse. Strong-looking knees." You nod, not sure how to respond, and are immediately handed a pitchfork. You spend the day reinforcing sagging fence posts, fetching water from a frozen stream, and attempting to chase a herd of sheep out of a storage shed where they've suddenly taken up residence like squatters. Your spouse is beside you through all of it, laughing occasionally, complaining not at all, and somehow managing to look competent even while falling into a snowbank while holding a chicken. In quieter moments, you catch little glances between the uncle and your spouse, between you and the cousin who keeps appearing and disappearing like a spectre with extra hay. It's not quite suspicion anymore. It's observation, assessment. You're not just visiting, you're being tested. Historically, the post-wedding honeymoon was rarely a private affair. While some couples stayed close to home for a period of feasting and integration, others made the rounds to nearby kin, especially if the marriage was politically or socially significant. It was less about romance and more about establishing a new identity, as a unit, a team, an alliance. And yes, the phrase honeymoon doesn't originate from Viking culture per se, but the idea of a first phase of marriage being about integration, labour and visibility, that's spot on, especially if it comes with blisters. You and your spouse work through the week, visiting a second cousin's farm next. This time you help mend a roof and stir a vat of fish oil until your eyes burn, and your sense of smell begs for mercy. You meet a grandmother who gives you a rune carved into a deer antler, and tells you not to look at the moon on Thursdays. You sleep in drafty lofts, eat meals on the floor, and once wake up to find a rooster nesting on your leg. And through it all, you start to move together more naturally. No whispered instructions, no awkward second-guessing. Just a rhythm forming in the way you hand over tools, adjust packs, laugh at the same moments, and predict each other's next move like a pair of wolves learning the same trail. One night after a particularly long day of chopping wood and not accidentally setting the kindling pile on fire, success, you and your spouse sit outside under the stars, wrapped in the same fur cloak, steam rising from your breath in lazy curls. "I think your family likes me," you say. "They haven't tried to drown you yet. That's a great sign." You both laugh and it lingers. Warmer than the fire. Truer than anything you could have said on your wedding night. And here's the weird fringe fact of the night. Some Viking couples, especially in Iceland, believe the first fire they lit together symbolised the soul of the marriage. If it burned strong and evenly, the union would thrive. If it sputtered or smoked too much, trouble ahead. You remember your first fire. Awkwardly stoked, full of ash and nerves, but it burned. It still burns. By the end of the week, when you return to your own longhouse, sore, wind-burned, and probably still reeking of smoked fish, You've earned something little. Not just respect, but place. People see you differently now, less new spouse and more our spouse. The shift is subtle, but it matters. That night, as you finally collapse into your shared bed, your spouse rolls toward you, hair a mess, feet cold against yours. "I like being tired with you," they say. You smile, eyes already closing. "We should get tired together more often." "Just not with sheep in the bed this time." Agreed. You sleep the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who has lifted other people's fences, shared food with the strangers, and found unexpected joy in the most exhausting week of your life. Your honeymoon? It may not have involved beaches or palm trees, but you wouldn't trade it for anything. You wake to knocking, not on a door, but on you, a knuckle against your ribs, gentle but insistent. You groan, blink against the haze of sleep, and find your spouse already dressed, hair damp and eyes too bright for this hour. "They're here," they whisper. "The midwives and matchmakers. Don't look directly at them unless you want your soul read." It takes you a second to pass that sentence, then another to realise you're being dragged from the warm safety of your bed to stand in front of a group of women who all look like they were born scowling and haven't stopped since. Midwives, matchmakers, elders, the women who keep track of who was born, who's marrying whom, and who hasn't produced a child yet despite plenty of time and a healthy stock of fish. They descend upon you like a murder of ravens wrapped in wool cloaks, each clutching baskets, bundles, and most worryingly questions. This is not an ambush, this is an evaluation. "Stand up straight," one of them snaps, eyeing your shoulders. "Have you been eating properly? You look pale." Another grabs your hand and presses her thumb to your palm. "Warm. Good circulation. Maybe. You drink water?" A third begins untying your cloak, apparently deciding whether your hip bones suggest fertility or famine. You glance at your spouse, who's being subjected to a parallel interrogation involving back posture, ankle strength, and whether they've been sleeping near enough to the hearth for optimal virility. This isn't romantic, it's agricultural, because in this world, love might start a marriage, but children are what anchor it. The midwives are here to check your prospects, not medically exactly, not scientifically, but through a strange blend of folk wisdom, observation, and pure vibe. They sniff your breath, they poke your ribs. One woman holds a dried fish over your head and mutters a few words in what might be a pre-Norse dialect. "Just checking for balance," she says when you flinch. Can't have the spirits thinking you're off-centre. And then, as quickly as it started, they move on, leaving behind the faint smell of elderflower and judgment. You and your spouse sit back down on the edge of the bed, dazed. "Did we pass?" you ask. "They didn't throw salt," they reply. "So, I think yes?" In Viking society, reproduction wasn't just personal, it was political. Children meant heirs, hands for labour, and continuations of alliances. A childless marriage, especially one that didn't even try, was seen as suspect, maybe even cursed. Of course, this pressure fell heavier on women, but make no mistake, men weren't off the hook either. A husband who couldn't prove himself fertile might find himself the subject of saga jokes, usually involving goats and disappointing spears. So yes, midwives and matchmakers making surprise visits in the first few weeks wasn't uncommon. And no, there wasn't much you could do about it, except smile, answer questions, and try not to flinch when someone held an herb bundle under your nose and asked whether your dreams had been fruitful. The rest of the day passes in a weird, floaty sort of fog. People treat you just a little differently now. There are more side eyes, more pats on the shoulder, a few sly comments about hoping for good news by next harvest. You find a fertility rune tucked into your sleeping corner, just sitting there, carved into wood and wrapped in red yarn like a talisman, left by a very pushy ghost. You try to ignore it. You and your spouse spend the evening mending a ripped tunic together, sitting on the floor near the hearth. It's not a romantic moment exactly, but it's quiet, real. Hands working in tandem, bodies close, breath shared. When your needle pricks your thumb, your spouse immediately grabs your hand, inspects it like it's a battlefield wound, and kisses the tiny dot of blood. You roll your eyes. It's not a dual scar. Still counts. Later, when the longhouse has quieted and the fire is just embers, your spouse whispers, "I know they want us to think about children." You nod. They made that extremely clear. And I'm not saying I don't want that someday. Just not because they expect it, not yet. There's silence, not heavy, just thoughtful. I want our house to feel full before we add more people to it, they add, even if it's just us for a while. You shift closer. What if we adopt a goat? Only if it doesn't belong to your ex. That makes you laugh. Here's a strange fringe belief worth mentioning. Some Viking communities believed that fertility wasn't just about biology, it was about spiritual readiness. If a home wasn't balanced, if a couple wasn't in harmony, then children born into that space would suffer for it. That's why so many of these rituals and superstitions existed. Not to enforce reproduction, but to prepare the ground. Like ploughing a field before planting. That night, you dream of a tree growing in the centre of your shared chest, branches pushing out through the seams, leaves sprouting from the hinges. When you wake, there's nothing but your spouse's steady breathing and the quiet whistle of wind through the roof slats. No fish, no spirits, no midwives crouched at the end of the bed. You count that as a win. The rune charm stays in the corner. You don't throw it out, but you don't hang it above the bed either. You're not ready to call the spirits back just yet. Not until you've earned your breath again, built your rhythm, finished sewing this tunic, because winter is coming, and frankly, you still don't know where the good wool socks are stored. And maybe, just maybe, love can come quietly in between all the poking and prodding in stitches and whispered jokes, and the silent decision to wait. For now. The next evening, long after the midwives have vanished and your dignity has mostly recovered, you're sitting by the hearth thinking the day might actually end peacefully. You've got a bowl of warm ale in your lap, your spouse beside you fiddling with a cracked belt buckle, and for once nobody's yelling about goats. That's when the old warriors start talking. You hear the rumble of their voices before you even realise what they're doing, taking turns telling marriage stories. Not romantic ones, not sweet tales full of flowers and sighs. These are marriage stories in their rawest, most brutal, weirdest forms. What starts as two old men sharpening knives and drinking mead quickly turns into a storytelling showdown, and before long, the whole longhouse settles into a semicircle around the fire, ready for this unexpected bedtime horror show. The first tale is about a man who married a woman with a cursed loom. Every thread she wove eventually became tangled into knots that spelled runes no one could translate, and their children were born with webbed fingers. The gods were warning us, he says with a shrug, but we were in love, or drunk. Laughter bubbles up from the corner, but it dies quickly, because the next story, that one's darker. A woman who married for land only to find her husband buried a treasure under the floorboards, and her job, apparently, was to guard it in silence. We never spoke of it, she says now, voice thin and strange, even after I found it, even after I reburied it. We lived well, but not honestly. The stories keep coming, each one sliding into the next like an unwelcome guest pulling up a stool at the fire. A man who fell in love with a warrior woman, but couldn't stop dreaming of her twin sister. A couple who traded roles every full moon. She ran the trade routes while he stayed home, and eventually no one in the village could remember which of them was really in charge. One tale of love born in a storm that ended in madness when the wife started hearing voices in the wind. No one blinks at any of it. No one questions the details, because this is how truths are shared here, not directly, but in story form. Each tale a warning, a confession, a boast, or sometimes just a record of survival. You sip your ale, feeling its warmth bloom in your chest. Your spouse leans close. Do you think they're telling the truth? And here's where it gets interesting. In Viking culture, storytelling was more than a pastime. It was currency. It was education. It was how you passed on values without sounding like a nagging aunt. You wanted to warn a couple not to let jealousy fester? You didn't lecture. You told the tale of the woodcutter who accused his wife of witchcraft after she started winning every archery contest. Spoiler, she was a witch, but also very good at archery. Even marriage stories weren't meant to be tidy. In fact, the messier they were, the more useful. Because Viking marriages weren't clean-cut love matches where everyone lived happily ever after. They were partnerships forged under pressure by land deals, shifting alliances, inherited grudges, and the sheer logistical challenge of surviving in a frozen, smoke-filled longhouse with 20 other people and one very judgmental goat. And yet, in between all the chaos, people did find love. Or something close. Companionship. Respect. Maybe even joy. You hear a new voice rise from the edge of the circle. It's It's one of the younger wives, barely older than you, telling the story of how she refused to marry anyone unless they could answer 3 riddles. Her eventual husband failed 2 of them, but instead of giving up, he built her a small hut out of driftwood shaped like question marks. It made no sense, she says, smiling into her bowl, but it made me laugh. A softer laugh now, more thoughtful. The mood has shifted. Less eerie, more reflective. Like everyone's remembering their own beginnings. Your spouse shifts beside you and murmurs, "If you were a story, what would your lesson be?" You raise an eyebrow. "Don't marry anyone who owns a brown goat?" They chuckle. Too easy. How about, "Never fall in love with someone who keeps their socks under the firewood?" "That's practical," you reply. "Keeps them dry." They smile, and for a brief moment, the fire seems to warm more than just your skin. This is what they don't put in the sagas. These quiet, sideways glances, these dumb jokes whispered between chores, these moments where the chaos pauses long enough for you to feel the small seed of something growing. Eventually, the old warriors wind down. The one with the eye patch, which he absolutely does not need for medical reasons, by the way, it's purely dramatic, tells the final story. His wife chased him across a frozen river with a ladle when he tried to leave her for a merchant's daughter. "That's how I knew she loved me," he says, sipping the dregs of his ale. "She cared enough to run." Everyone nods like this is perfectly normal. You and your spouse rise quietly and head back to your bed alcove. The curtain is drawn, the furs are still warm, and the scent of burning pine clings to your cloak. You settle in beside them, still half smiling from the stories. The room hums with residual energy, as though the tales themselves are stretching and settling into the walls. And here's the scholarly debate. How much of these marriage stories were real? Did these things actually happen? Or were they crafted over time, honed for effect? Most historians agree that the sagas, while rooted in truth, were shaped by the tellers. But that's the point. The story isn't about what happened. It's about what needed to be remembered. You close your eyes, letting the last echoes of the night's tales drift through your thoughts. Somewhere someone laughs in their sleep. Somewhere else, a spoon clatters softly to the floor, and in the dark your spouse whispers, "Let's make a good story." You don't answer with words, you just reach for their hand, already knowing the first line. Once, there were 2 people who didn't know what they were doing, but they tried anyway. You wake to the smell of horse. Not a pleasant hint of hay-scented air, but horse, hot, sweaty, slightly panicked horse. It's coming from outside, mixed with voices, the creak of leather, and the sharp clang of hooves on frozen earth. You roll over, blink at the curtain fluttering in a breeze someone definitely shouldn't have let in, and then your spouse's face appears beside you, upside down and already grinning. "It's market day," they say. "We're going. Bring your best socks." You groan. What happened to a quiet morning? "Market," they repeat, like it's a battle cry. "My parents said we have to show up. It's our first appearance as a unit. Come on, this is the fun part." That sounds suspiciously like a lie. But you get dressed anyway. Layered tunics, a rough wool cloak, your one halfway decent belt, and those aforementioned socks, which you hope still match. Your spouse pins their cloak with that same little bronze clasp from before, the one shaped like a fish, and you wonder briefly if it means something. Later, you tell yourself. Ask later. Outside, the longhouse is buzzing with pre-market chaos. Someone's yelling about a missing sled. A child is trying to attach jingle bells to a chicken. A teenage cousin is attempting to braid her own hair, while also harnessing a horse and eating a dried pear. It's a lot. You and your spouse are handed a bundle. Trade goods wrapped up tight. Woven cloth, a few carved bone needles, dried herbs, a tiny jar of pine resin salve that supposedly works on burns, rashes, and emotional wounds. You sling the bundle over your back, step into the sled, and join the slow caravan winding its way toward the next village, where the market is already stirring. The ride is bumpy and cold. You clutch the edge of the sled to stay upright as the horse trudges through the snowy path. Your spouse, for once, isn't talking. They're watching the trees. You wonder if they're nervous too. First market as a couple. First time you'll be seen not just by your own people, but by everyone else's. Neighbours, exes, that guy who always smells like seal meat and tries to sell broken combs like they're ancient relics. When you arrive, the market is already in full swing. It's chaos wrapped in fur. Tents flap in the wind, smoke rises from half a dozen fires. There's someone selling hot flatbread with garlic and something you sincerely hope is onion. A woman is shouting the praises of her goats. All pure-blooded, no inbreeding, I swear on Odin's beard. A group of children is playing tug-of-war with a sled rope while an old man snores on a pile of pelts behind them. Your spouse tugs your sleeve and whispers, "Stick close." You nod, and then someone says your name. You turn. A man is walking toward you with a smile that's just a little too wide, eyes just a little too sharp. He's broad-shouldered, hands tucked behind his back like he's just remembered how charming he can be. Your spouse tenses immediately. "Didn't expect to see you here so soon," he says. "Married life already dragging you into trade?" You nod politely. "It's our first market day together." He glances at your spouse, then back to you. "I remember when you used to talk about markets. Thought you'd end up in a bigger village, or maybe heading out east." "I thought about a lot of things," you say. He chuckles. "Well, if that ever changes—" "Stop," your spouse says, stepping between you. Not a shout, not even a threat, just a word wrapped in a very firm tone. And just like that, the moment snaps. The man shrugs, smirks, and wanders off, whistling like he's just made a joke no one else understood. You turn to your spouse, ready to thank them or brush it off, but they just say, "You don't owe anyone a memory." Then they hand you a pouch of coins and walk toward a booth selling knives with carved hilts. You stand there for a moment, letting that sentence sink in. You don't owe anyone a memory. Then you follow. Market day is less about shopping and more about performing. Every couple is on display. People trade not just goods but gossip. Who looks happy, who's walking too far apart, who's not speaking at all. You and your spouse stick close, moving in sync. You try not to overthink it. Just be here. Be present. You trade 3 bundles of herbs for a pair of embroidered mittens. A bag of dried mushrooms gets you a new comb. The cloth goes quickly, snapped up by a merchant who appraises the weave with a single nod and pays in polished shell beads that your spouse assures you are much fancier than they look. As the afternoon deepens, the air grows warmer, somehow heavier. You pause near the food stalls and share a cup of hot milk and honey, your fingers brushing theirs as you both reach for the same spoon. The tension from earlier starts to melt. And then the questions begin. They come in pairs, in whispers, in not-so-subtle comments from passing acquaintances. "So when are you planning children?" "Have you chosen a name yet? Just in case?" "Is it true you gave up your inheritance to marry?" You dodge, deflect, laugh where you can. Your spouse handles it better somehow, smiling, nodding, using sarcasm like a shield. But the pressure is real and it starts to dig in. That's when your spouse pulls you aside and says, "Let's get lost." You blink. "What?" "Just for an hour. Let's walk where no one knows us." You agree because honestly you need it. You leave the main path, past the meat stalls and wool traders, past the scolds and the old woman telling fortunes with chicken bones, down a path that leads to the frozen lake. Quiet, at last. There's a small dock, half covered in frost, and you sit on it together, legs dangling above the ice. The sun is low now, casting gold light across the frozen surface. For a long moment, you say nothing. Then your spouse speaks. "It's strange how loud people can be about things they don't understand." You nod. "They act like they know what we are, what we should be." You glance over. "What do you think we are?" They shrug. 2 people trying to figure it out, that should be enough. It is. Back at the market, you return just in time to barter a length of rope for a smoked trout and dodge a pair of goats locked going what appears to be an ancient blood feud. You leave heavier in goods, lighter in nerves. The ride back is quieter, more comfortable. You and your spouse don't talk much, but your hands stay close, fingers brushing with the rhythm of the sled. Not performative, not strategic, just steady, just yours. The market dust has barely settled from your cloak, the fishy scent still clinging to your mittens when someone knocks on the side of the longhouse. Not the door, the side, home to 3 sharp thuds on the wooden wall like they couldn't be bothered with formality. You're near the hearth, trying to scrub soot off a spoon using a pine cone and a prayer, and you glance up just as your spouse stiffens, not frozen in fear, more like annoyed recognition. "Who is it?" you ask, low. They sigh. "It's probably him." "Him who?" "Just come see." So you do. You follow your spouse to the longhouse threshold, and there, standing just past the firewood stack, is a man you immediately know has history. Not because he says anything, not yet, but because he stands like someone who thinks he might still be important to you. like someone who's practiced this moment in his head far too many times. He's got that look. The "I just happened to be passing through" look paired with the "I heard you were married" delivery. His hair is neater than it should be after travel. His boots are clean. No horse in sight. Suspicious. "Didn't expect to see you so soon," he says, voice soft like the start of a snowstorm. "Heard the news. Thought I'd stop in, just for a word." Your spouse crosses their arms. "You've said plenty of words already." He looks at them unbothered. "I didn't come for you," which is the exact wrong thing to say, and suddenly you're in the middle of something that feels like a saga scene. The moment when the past, bold and arrogant, steps directly into your new life and demands attention. You didn't think you'd have one of those, but here he is, the old suitor, the once upon a time option, the person your family might have nudged you toward before things took a different turn. "I just thought we could talk," he says, eyes settling on you now. "Just a moment, for old time's sake." And here's the problem. You do remember him, not everything, not fondly, but you remember the long walks that never quite led anywhere, the jokes that hovered just on the edge of real affection, the way he talked about the future like it was something he could shape with his bare hands. You remember wanting to believe him, but that was before you understood what actual work looks like, what showing up means, what choosing someone daily actually feels like. Still you hesitate, and that's when your spouse steps forward, not aggressively, not even confrontationally, just present, solid. They don't speak, they don't grab your hand, they just stand beside you like a wall that grew legs and decided to be polite about it. The suitor blinks, his smile falters just slightly, and for a moment you see it, the realization creeping in that he's not a threat anymore, just a leftover, a half-finished line in a song you never really liked. "I think," you say carefully, "we've both already chosen where we stand." He exhales sharply through his nose, not quite a laugh. "Right, well, thought I'd try." And with that, he turns and walks off. No horse, no cloak, just footprints vanishing into the snow, like he was never there to begin with. Back inside, you and your spouse return to your spots by the fire. You stir the stew again, watching a bubble rise and burst on the surface. They speak first. "So, that was dramatic." You snort. "Are you mad?" "No, not mad." A pause. "Mostly glad." "Glad?" "That I'm not him." You look at them. "You never were." They smile, small but real. "That's why you married me." And here's your historical fun fact. Viking-era relationships weren't immune to lingering attachments. Arranged marriages, alliances, and personal preference often clashed. Old lovers or hopeful matches might linger like ghosts, especially in small communities where everyone knows everyone. Some sagas are littered with tales of suitors returning, sometimes seeking closure, sometimes vengeance, sometimes both. Occasionally they end in duels, occasionally in very awkward family dinners. Scholars debate just how common these post-marriage interruptions were. Some say they were romantic exaggerations, dramatic flourishes to spice up otherwise straightforward unions. Others believe they reflected real social tension, especially in households with shifting alliances, or ambitious younger sons still trying to marry upward. What's certain is that how you handle those moments mattered. Back in the longhouse, your spouse hands you a chunk of bread and says, "So, do I get points for not threatening him with a spoon?" "Major points," you say. "That was peak maturity." They nod. "I considered throwing a log at him, but then I remembered you like that log. It's your favourite one." It is a good log. You settle back into your evening routine, the heat from the fire slowly returning to your fingers. Someone on the far side of the room begins humming, and a few voices pick up the tune, soft and winding like a lullaby that forgets it's supposed to be sad. There's a calm in the air now, not silence but stillness, as if the house has absorbed your decision, added it to the structure, the bones of your choice reinforcing the beams overhead. Because that's the truth, isn't it? Marriage isn't just a one-time promise. It's a rejection of all the other possible stories. A daily no to the past. Daily yes to someone beside you. And right now that someone is sharing your bread, watching the firelight flicker across your face and doing absolutely nothing except being here. Which honestly is everything. Outside the wind picks up again, scattering the footprints. You never ask where the old suitor went, and you never need to. The next morning breaks with a thump. Not thunder, not hooves, but the kind of authoritative knocking that means someone has brought a scroll, a sword, or a summons. You're sitting on the bench pulling burrs out of your sock when the longhouse door opens and in walks a Godi. A priest of sorts, though priest doesn't quite cover it. He's got a cloak made of patched furs, a staff capped with antler, and a face that looks like it's been chiselled by 3 decades of harsh winters and worse opinions. You don't need anyone to say it. The moment he steps into the smoky warmth of the room, everyone stops what they're doing. Even the goat chewing a curtain in the corner freezes mid-bite. Your spouse appears at your side like they teleported and mutters under their breath. Law talk, don't panic. Oh, good. The Godi announces in that grim ceremonial tone that today's visit is a formal one. He's making the rounds to review the status of all newlyweds in the district. That means you. Specifically, it means your marriage. It's time to learn the rules, or more accurately, it's time to learn what happens if things go wrong. You're summoned to the centre of the longhouse, not with a flourish, but with that kind of heavy silence that makes your palms sweat. Your spouse joins you, arms folded tight. You both stand side by side as the Godi begins his lesson, like a man reciting a weather warning that involves wolves, fire, and possibly frogs. Marriage, he says, is a contract. That much you know, the bride price, the dowry, the household rights, the legal transfer of goats, check. But marriage, he continues, is also an agreement between families and the gods. If either party fails to uphold the expectations, honesty, contribution, loyalty, there are options and consequences. And just like that, you're learning about divorce. In Viking society, marriage wasn't a lifelong prison sentence or a romantic fantasy. It was a partnership, one that could be ended if either side had cause. Infidelity, abuse, laziness, even persistent, unbearable incompatibility. The process, surprisingly straightforward. You didn't need a counsel or a priest, just witnesses, just honesty, just, often, a public statement. I divorce you. It's more dramatic in Old Norse, of course, but the message stands. Your spouse shifts beside you, jaw tight. The Godi keeps going. If one partner leaves the bed for 3 nights in a row without cause, the marriage may be dissolved. 3 nights, you whisper. That's it, he nods. Unless agreed otherwise. If no witnesses are present, the party must return all agreed property, minus the shared bedding and any wool spun together. Wool spun together? That's the line between domestic union and spiritual schism? Suddenly the spindle charm Svala gave you doesn't feel so decorative. The Godi produces a wax tablet and scratches your names into it with a stylus. This union will be revisited at the mid-year gathering. Until then, live well. Share duties, make offerings, do not provoke the gods or each other. And then, just as abruptly as he entered, he's gone, back into the snow with his staff tapping against the ground like the ticking of some divine hourglass. You stand there in stunned silence. Well, your spouse says, that was cheerful. You sit down slowly, heart still thudding. Did you know about the 3 nights rule? Of course, everyone does. That's why people fight quietly and sleep angrily next to each other. You can't help but laugh. So you don't walk out, you just sleep farther away? Exactly, as far as you want. As long as your foot touches the blanket, the gods consider it salvageable. The humour helps, but the idea lingers. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Viking marriages were built to function, not to lock people in. Divorce wasn't rare or shameful. It was simply a reset, socially accepted, sometimes even expected if the match soured early. Women could initiate it, which made Norse culture remarkably progressive for its time. All they had to do was call witnesses, pack up their belongings, and state their intent. Men had the same rights. No need for litigation, just dignity, honesty, and a clean break. Some sagas even praised those who knew when to leave, when a union no longer honoured either party or when loyalty became a burden instead of a bond. That afternoon you and your spouse go for a walk, silent for a long stretch. The snow crunches beneath your boots. The wind slips into your collar like a nosy old aunt. Finally your spouse says, well, I wouldn't leave, you know. Even if we had a week of fighting, I'd just sleep on the other end of the goat. You grin. Generous. But I'm glad it's an option if we needed it. I think people stay too long when there's no way out. You nod slowly. Freedom makes the choice mean more. Exactly. You walk in silence for a while longer, the trees creaking in the wind, the world soft with snow and distant crow calls. There's no tension, just wait. The kind that sits beside you like an old friend and reminds you what you have is fragile, but not in a bad way. Fragile like glass, like thread, like something worth handling carefully. When you return, you find a cousin has stacked firewood in the corner without being asked. Someone left a wedge of cheese on the bench by your chest. Quiet acknowledgements, little gestures, and the community knows what happened today, and they're watching. Not to judge, but to witness. Because in this world, your marriage isn't just yours, it's a thread in a wider tapestry. The tension and the resilience are part of the same pattern. That night, you lie in bed beside your spouse, backs nearly touching, breath syncing up. After a while, they speak. Just so we're clear, they say, if I ever sleep on the floor, it's not a statement. It's because you've been kicking. Understood. And if I take the wool blanket with me, I will drag you back like a bear with a stolen fish. You both laugh, quiet, tired, happy. The kind of laughter that stitches things stronger. You close your eyes, thinking about the spindle whirl, the 3 nights, the unwritten vows held not by paper but by shared rhythm. Tomorrow might bring another challenge, a disagreement, a bad mood. But tonight, your foot stays firmly on the blanket. It starts with butter, or more specifically, with the refusal to churn it. A quiet, stubborn, utterly intentional refusal. You walk into the longhouse one morning, still brushing sleep from your eyes, to find the cream sitting in its carved wooden churn, untouched. It's been there since dawn, when the housekeeper left it on the bench with that passive-aggressive silence that screams, "You know what this is for." Your spouse walks in not long after you, sees it, glances at you, then picks up a loaf of bread and begins casually slicing it, completely ignoring the butter situation, which is suspicious because it's their turn. You know it. They know it. The churn definitely knows it. So you pick up a ladle instead and stir the pot over the fire, not saying anything, just waiting. The silence grows. Not angry, yet, but chilly, tense, like winter creeping in through a cracked window. You catch your spouse peeking over their shoulder, clearly doing the math of whether they can win a silent war over dairy. You don't bring it up, neither do they. And so without a single word spoken, it begins. The housework Cold War. Historians don't write much about this. They should. The quiet battles waged over chores, over who starts the fire first, who feeds the chickens when it's sleeting sideways, who gets up to close the door when it bangs open for the 10th time during a windstorm. Viking marriage wasn't built on grand gestures. It was built on a million little acts of effort, or refusal, the unswept corner, the unemptied chamber pot, the spoon that somehow always disappears during your meal shift and reappears for theirs. You scrub the cook pot, but only the inside. They sweep the floor, but leave your boots where they are, crusted in snow. You arrange the bed furs, but forget to fluff their favourite head pillow. Petty, absolutely, but deeply satisfying in the moment. It's not about the butter anymore. It's about recognition, respect. Whether they notice that you've been carrying extra weight, whether you notice when they're biting back exhaustion just to keep the fire going. It's a language, this back and forth. Not a healthy one, maybe, but an honest one. One afternoon you find that the water buckets haven't been refilled. You refill them yourself, stomping out to the well with enough fury to freeze the whole yard. When you return, drenched and victorious, your spouse hands you a clean towel and says, deadpan, "Impressive storm cloud formation out there." You nod without smiling. Felt appropriate. They glance toward the churn. Still no butter. Nope. Days pass like this. Quiet. Calculated. Close but not intimate. The curtain around your shared sleeping nook starts to stay closed more often. Not locked, just shut. You still share meals, still sit side by side during storytelling. But something is off balance. Not broken, just stuck. And like any good Viking couple, you're both too proud to say the obvious. So the housework battles continue, now escalated to wood stacking, uneven, cloak folding, wrong side out, and who gets the better bowl at breakfast, hint, not you. Then comes the thaw. It starts ironically with spilled milk. Literal, not metaphorical. You're both trying to get through a cramped morning routine, people bustling around the hearth, children underfoot, someone's dog having a full-blown identity crisis by the fire when you knock over a jug of fresh goat milk. It pours across the bowl, soaking everything in its path, including the morning bread. You freeze, expecting a sarcastic jab, maybe a dramatic sigh. Instead, your spouse calmly grabs a cloth, starts wiping it up and says, "Well, that bread was cursed anyway." You laugh, loudly, uncontrollably. It bubbles up like spring breaking through the ice. Your spouse joins in, and for a moment you're just two ridiculous people soaked in goat milk and bad decisions. That night you both reach for the churn at the same time. You pause. They say, "Let's do it together." So you do. And here's where the real-life scholars would get excited. There's evidence in the sagas and household records that Viking couples often work together, not just out of efficiency, but to reinforce their roles as a team. The gender lines were there, sure, but they were fluid, especially in households where both partners had strong personalities. And let's face it, that's most Viking marriages. Some historians argue that shared labour created more stable unions. Others say it simply reduced the number of spoons thrown in anger. Either way, cooperation was key, and withholding effort was a known form of protest. No one wants to go to the thing and explain that their marriage collapsed over dairy neglect. After that night, the rhythm begins to return. Your spouse sharpens your knife without being asked. You restack their logs when they slump halfway through the pile. You start talking again, not just about chores, but about the little things. The way the wind sounds like singing in the rafters, the weird shape of the bread this week, whether the goat is actually cursed or just dramatic. You lie beside each other again without the wall of distance. You brush shoulders without flinching. You laugh without checking who laughs first. There's no apology, not directly, but you each say it in your own way. They warm your mittens by the fire. You leave the better blanket on their side of the bed. And one morning, without a word, they churn the butter before you even wake up. You rise to the smell of bread and fresh churned cream. They're sitting by the fire, feeding kindling to the flames like nothing happened. You sit beside them. No need to talk about it. The truce is held. For now, the air smells like iron and the pine again, but this time it's not blood on the wind, it's sweat. The forge is open, smoke is curling in a lazy black ropes through the village square, and someone is hammering with such relentless rhythm that it rattles the teeth in your skull. You shade your eyes and squint toward the clang just in time to see a spark leap and arc into the air, wild and golden. Your spouse is beside you, arms crossed, eyes focused on the figure at the anvil. "It's his wedding gift to us," they say. "The blacksmith." They nod. "He's late, but it's still a gift." You watch as the blacksmith, who's about the size and shape of a mountain, raises his hammer again and brings it down with a sound that could wake gods. Wedding gifts in Viking culture weren't all silver bracelets and ceremonial cups. Sure, those happened too, but more often gifts came in the form of tools, clothing, a patch of good land, or, if you were lucky, a weapon. Not for war necessarily, but for life. Something to carry, something to keep, something to use. In your case, it's a knife. A hand-forged, iron-bladed, bone-handled belt knife, crafted not for beauty, but for durability. A partner's tool, a piece of everyday survival. You're called forward to the forge by the blacksmith's apprentice, a girl no older than 10, but already missing 2 fingertips and wearing a soot-streaked smirk that suggests she's got the forge spirit in her blood. She hands you a pair of gloves that are still warm and says, "Don't drop it, or he'll make you dig up more bog iron." You approach the anvil slowly. The blacksmith is still working, but now his pace has shifted. It's not showy. It's personal. He's whispering something under his breath as he moves. A prayer, maybe. Or a curse. Or a recipe. You can't tell. He turns the blade in the light, holds it up, and lets it cool just enough to press the spine into the snow-packed dirt beside the anvil. "Hold it," he says. "Let it choose you." You pick up the knife. It's heavier than you expect, balanced, smooth in the grip, and warm despite the chill. Your spouse steps beside you and places their hand over yours, fingers wrapping yours around the hilt. "Now it's ours," they say. It's not ceremonial. It's not even particularly poetic. But something in your chest settles, like a stone finding its place in the foundation. Later, back at the longhouse, you carve your names, or rather marks, into the handle. 2 symbols, side by side, one curling like a winded leaf, the other jagged, like a lightning bolt path. The knife is tucked into a sheath and hung near the door, not on display, not hidden, just there, present, like your marriage. But here's the twist. Viking couples didn't always exchange gifts at the wedding. Sometimes the real gifts came later, once the household began to function. The first winter survived, the first harvest shared, the first child born, or not born. Sometimes the gift was simply time, proving the bond with labour and laughter and shared silence. There are records, barely, faint like watermarks, of items passed down from one spouse to another, with notes etched into bone or wood. For our hearth, for your safety, for the day you must be without me. Simple, powerful tokens. That night you and your spouse sit by the fire, the new knife between you, the firelight catching the blade and throwing dancing flickers against the wall. I was nervous, they admit, when I asked him to make it. I didn't know if we'd be settled by now. You tilt your head. Are we? They shrug. Closer. I like that we fight like animals and still split the last apple. You grin. We didn't split it. I gave you the bigger half. Exactly, which means we're still good. You let that settle. Because they're right. A Viking marriage wasn't about being happy all the time. It wasn't built on romantic idealism. It was about function, about testing each other and still choosing to stay, about surviving together, not just wolves and winters, but each other's moods, habits, fears. And yes, sometimes that survival was marked with iron. You look again at the knife. There's nothing special to the outside eye. But you know the labour that went into it, the sweat, the heat, the risk of burning or breaking or missing the temper. That's marriage too. A thing you forge, a thing you sharpen, a thing that can wound or protect depending on how you hold it. At one point the old woman with the iron brooch wanders by your bedroll and nods toward the blade. You planning to hang that near your grave one day? You smile. If I can keep from dropping it in the stew pot first. She chuckles and keeps walking. Later, when the fire's gone low and your limbs are tired, your spouse whispers across the dark, "If you leave it outside, someone will steal it." You nod. Then I won't. Good, because I'm not helping you make another one. You fall asleep with the weight of the knife tucked into your thoughts. Not heavy, not sharp, just there, just yours. And maybe that's the point. A marriage doesn't need to be ceremonial every day. Sometimes it just needs to be forged and used and kept near the door, ready. By now, your days are threaded together like wool yarn, rough in places, soft in others, and occasionally tangled. You've settled into the rhythm of it all, waking before dawn, stoking the fire, taking turns with chores, sharing silence that no longer feels awkward. But then, right when you think the days might blend into sameness, something shifts. A visitor arrives, not an elder, not a blacksmith, not a neighbour with suspicious goat-related drama. This one's different. He wears a cloak so dark it looks wet even in the dry wind, and his boots are worn down to the stitching. His face is angular, unreadable, not local, definitely not family. When he speaks, it's in a dialect that wraps around your ears like a riddle. Old Norse, but curled inward. His name means owl or maya, or possibly dust, depending on how you translate it. And he says he's a skald. You've heard of them, of course. Poets, bards, singers of songs and tellers of uncomfortable truths. They're welcome in most longhouses, but rarely trusted. Because a skald can tell your story better than you can, sometimes before you even know it is yours. He arrives with nothing but a satchel full of bone flutes, scroll fragments, and a chunk of salted fish, which he immediately gifts to the housekeeper with a bow so low it borders on dramatic collapse. In exchange, he's granted a seat by the fire for the week, and suddenly your quiet, predictable evenings become performances. On the second night, he begins to watch you and your spouse, not openly, just glances, questions, observations. He asks how long you have been wed, what your first fight was, whether either of you has ever dreamed of running away into the mountains. You laugh off most of it, but the truth clings like wood smoke. By the third night, he starts telling your story. Not exactly, but close enough. He speaks of a couple newly joined, learning each other's habits and footfalls. One of them dreams of the sea, the other prefers the silence of trees. They argue about spoons and the placement of shoes. One day, the gods test their bond with a lost knife, a jealous ex, and a goat who speaks in riddles. You glance sideways at your spouse, they're smirking. He's watching us, they whisper. Then we should do something weird. You reach over and adjust the hem of their tunic into a perfect spiral, just because. They raise an eyebrow, then wink. The Scald keeps spinning the tale, and soon the entire longhouse is leaning forward, breath held like an audience at a duel. His voice rises and dips like the sea in winter, sometimes teasing, sometimes solemn, always precise. And somehow the story ends not with a wedding, or a birth, or a battle, but with a quiet moment. Two people repairing a broken bucket together, in silence under a leaking roof. The room is completely still. Then someone coughs, someone else chuckles, and the spell breaks. Here's the fascinating part. Scholars argue endlessly over whether Skalds were historians, entertainers, or manipulators. The sagas we have today, many of them, were first spoken aloud, shaped, edited for drama, for impact, which means what we remember of Viking marriages might be just the parts that sounded good beside a fire. The truth? Slippery, like eel fat on a wooden spoon. But stories mattered. People listened. A well-told tale could elevate a family, shame a rival, preserve a love, or twist it. On the fourth night, the Skald offers to compose a blessing for you and your spouse. You agree, not realizing it'll be delivered live, in front of everyone, during the next meal. He stands after the stew is served, raises a single carved stick, is it a spoon? And declares, "This is the tale of two who dared. They stitched their home with wool and will, they fought with bread, not blade or bard, and found each other quieter still." It's odd, rhythmic, and strangely moving. Someone claps, another whistles. You glance at your spouse, who whispers, "That's the best poem I've ever had thrown at me during dinner." You raise your mug. To being quieter still? The Skald smiles, deeply satisfied. You'll remember him long after he's gone, and he will leave on the 6th day. Before sunrise, his satchel packed and his fish bones cleaned bare. He leaves no goodbye, just a small piece of bark on your bedroll. Scratched into it are your two symbols, leaf and lightning, and a third, a spiral, for memory. That night you and your spouse sit alone. No poems, no stories, just the sound of wood popping in the hearth and the goat snoring gently from across the room. "Do you think he told the truth?" your spouse asks. You consider. He told a truth, maybe not ours, but close. They nod. "I liked our bucket ending." You smile. "We should probably fix that roof soon." You don't sleep much that night. Not from worry, just reflection, memory, because being married in this world means you are always part of a story. Your name will be whispered in doorways and beside fires, not for grandeur, but for the little things. The way you folded the bed furs, the way you stood during an argument, the way you looked at someone when they dropped the butter again. And maybe, just maybe, that story will outlive you. Not because you are perfect, but because someone saw you and told it. By the time spring even thinks about showing up, the world is still frozen stiff. The snowbanks have shrunk shore, but only just. What melts during the day refreezes at night into slippery sheets of betrayal, and the mud under your boots is now deep enough to demand its own name. And with the changing light comes a new kind of pressure. Not dramatic, not spoken, just implied, hinted, crooked smiles and... "So, have you made any news yet?" From neighbours who never used to care if you had matching socks, and you know what they mean. They all mean babies. You're trying to enjoy your stew when an elder woman leans over your shoulder and says, "There's something in your walk, dear. Your hips know something you don't." Then she cackles and waddles away before you can even react. Your spouse, to their credit, nearly chokes on their drink. "Your hips are profits now." "Fantastic," you mutter. "Should I start charging for consultations?" You know it's just part of the cycle. Newlyweds get poked and prodded, questioned and watched. And after enough time has passed, months, maybe a year, people start looking for signs. Not just of affection, but of outcome, of legacy. Because in this world, families aren't just built, they're counted, measured in bloodlines and ankle biters and who inherits which cow. And here's the kicker. It doesn't matter if you're ready. One morning, your spouse returns from the woods with a woven pouch of dried herbs and a look that says, "Don't panic." But you eye the pouch. What is that? They call it Mother's Leaf. Oh. They gave it to me at the healer's hut. Said we should prepare the soil, even if we don't plant yet. You sit down hard. I mean, I don't... Your spouse starts, but then stops. They sit beside you. It's just... everyone's watching. I know. Doesn't mean we have to do anything. I know. There's a historical curiosity in this moment. In Norse culture, having children wasn't just personal, it was social currency. A couple without children might be whispered about, but a couple choosing not to, that didn't even fit in the vocabulary of most communities. Yet there's evidence, quiet but there, of couples who never had kids, and didn't fracture, didn't fall apart, they just became the kind who passed down stories instead of blood. Later that week, you're helping with the spring cleaning of the longhouse, hauling out rugs, airing blankets, beating dust out of furs like it insulted your ancestors, when you stumble across an old cradle tucked in the storage corner. It's beautifully carved, if a bit battered, and lined with soft moss. You touch the edge without meaning to. Your spouse appears beside you. It was mine, they say. Oh. I used to pretend it was a boat. Sent pine cones down the stream in it when no one was looking. You smile. Did they make it back? Never. I blame the trolls. The cradle is heavier than it looks. You both carry it out, dust it off, leave it in the sun like some kind of unspoken offering. People notice. Of course they do. But no one says anything directly. Just smiles and nods and that look. That night while folding laundry, yes, even Viking laundry exists, you ask the question that's been clinging to your spine all week. Do you want to? Oh. They pause. Now? No, just in general. Your spouse takes a long breath. I think I'd like to try someday, but not because they're expecting it, because we're ready. You nod. What if we never are? They smile. Then we raise goats, or weird children we borrow from your cousin. You snort. We'd be the strange aunt and uncle. We already are. You finish folding in silence, but it's a lighter silence this time. One filled with options, not obligations, and that makes all the difference. Later, when the house quiets and the fire goes low, you pull out the pouch of herbs and hang it from a beam above the hearth. Not to use, just to acknowledge. It's not a promise, it's a maybe, a symbol. And here's the fringe belief of the night. Some Viking women believed that dreams could predict motherhood. Not just of their own children, but their role in the lives of others. A woman who dreamed of white wolves was said to be destined to raise a child, not her own. A man who dreamed of a cradle rocking alone in a field. That meant he would be a father, but not through blood. No one tells you what it means when you dream of pine cones floating downstream in a cradle-shaped boat. But you do that night, and you wake up feeling not certain, but calm. The kind of calm that comes not from decisions, but from knowing you have time to make them. In the morning, your spouse stirs the porridge and says, "If we have kids, I'm naming the first one Cradle Boat." Absolutely not. Then pine cone. Or better. You sit down together, share a bowl, pass the honey back and forth without thinking. The cradle still sits by the hearth. Not a question mark anymore. Not quite a period either. Just punctuation. You'll figure out the sentence later. The rains come in April, but they don't arrive politely. No gentle drizzle, no poetic mist swirling through the fjord. Just an absolute sky tantrum. Thunder rolls across the mountains like a herd of gods having a fistfight, and for 2 days straight, everything you own is damp. The longhouse smells like wet wool, wet fur, wet wood, wet everything. You sit near the hearth, one sock drying above your head, the other somewhere in the eternal void beneath the bench, and think, maybe this is it, maybe this is where we all rot, mildew slowly, and become a cautionary tale for future generations. Your spouse walks by, hair dripping, holding thee a bowl of barley soup and looking like a drowned squirrel. Our roof is doing that thing again. You sigh. The thing where it pretends to be a sieve? Yes, or an interpretive art piece. Roof leaks were not uncommon in Viking longhouses, especially in early spring when thawing snow revealed every careless patch job from the previous year. Yours seems to have developed a hobby of redirecting rainwater strategically. One drip over the fire pit, one in your bed furs, and one directly onto your lap during meals. You try to fix it, you really do, but wet thatch is about as cooperative as a cat on a leash. The day stretches long, everyone's grumpy. The goat is damp and offended. Children are trapped indoors and invent a game called Hit the Married Couple with Sticks, which your spouse genuinely encourages, until you remind them that head wounds do not impress the gods. By the third day of rain, your patience snaps, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet internal crack, like a wood beam giving way deep inside your soul. You're halfway through weaving a basket for dried herbs, and you just stop, stand up and announce, "We're going outside." Your spouse blinks. "In the rain?" "Yes." "Why?" "'Cause I'd rather be soaked in freedom than slowly composting in this longhouse." So you go. You both step into the rain without cloaks, because at this point, what's the point? It's already in your bones. The cold hits like a zip, and the mud greets you like an overly affectionate dog. But you walk, past the fields, where the frost is pulling back like a sulking child, past the woodshed, past the sagging fence where one of your neighbours tried to teach a cow to dance last week. Don't ask, it ended in splinters and mooing. Eventually you find the stream. Swollen now, moving fast, it hums like something alive. You sit on a mossy rock and let the water noise drown out the world. Your spouse stands nearby, arms outstretched, face tipped back to the sky like they're trying to absorb the storm. And then, without warning, they scream. A long, raw yell right into the clouds. You stare, then you laugh, then you scream too. It's ridiculous. It's pointless. It's perfect. This, weirdly enough, is bonding. You head back soaked and shivering but lighter, like you left something heavy out there in the mud. Maybe a week's worth of resentment. Maybe just your pride. You're not the only ones who've snapped. That night, someone in the longhouse starts banging on a pot and singing old battle chants until a relative silences them with a pillow to the face. A couple 2 alcoves down gets into a dramatic fight over cheese and ends up locked in a passionate embrace by the fire. Rain makes people weird. Marriage makes it weirder. And yes, historians know this. Spring was one of the most psychologically fragile times for Viking households. Food stores were low, nerves were frayed, and the longhouse, already crowded, started to feel like a pressure cooker. Conflicts rose, tempers flared. The sagas mention entire households dissolving in the spring thaw, with one famous passage describing a woman who walked into the forest with a spoon and was never seen again. You hold on to that image for days, but in your own world something shifts. Maybe it's the screaming, maybe it's surviving the flood. But you and your spouse begin to laugh more. You don't solve the roof problem, you accept it. You build a system of pots and wooden troughs to catch the leaks and redirect the water into the wash bucket. It looks ridiculous, but it works. You even name the biggest drip Harold the Leaky, and when someone asks if he's your child, you say, "Yes, he's our wettest mistake." Together you patch the cracks in the wall with mud and straw, you repair the fire pit stones. You teach the goat not to stand on your drying laundry, kind of. It's still hard. You still argue, usually about stupid things. Why someone moved the butter knife, who forgot to feed the chicken that likes to scream at dawn. But the arguments pass faster now, like the weather, like the stream. One night, as the rain finally begins to slow, your spouse reaches out in the dark and says, "I think we're better in storms." You turn to them. "What do you mean?" "We talk more. We stop pretending. We yell into the sky." You smile. "So you want to be married in a rain cloud forever?" They chuckle. "Not forever. Just long enough to know we can handle it." You lie there listening to the final drips on the roof, the wind settling. The goat sneezes softly, and you think, yeah, maybe this is what marriage is. Not the ceremonies, not the gifts, not even the shared chores. But this, the choosing over and over, through leaks and mud and thunder and goat breath. Choosing to laugh when you could scream, or scream together and then laugh anyway. Rain seeps into everything, but so does love. It starts with smoke, not fire, not danger, just the gentle kind that seeps under your nose and tells you something's burning just enough to be annoying. You sit up in bed, squint at the rafters, and realise the chimney's got itself clogged again, which means it's your turn to fix it. Technically it's your spouse's turn, but they handled the goat incident yesterday, and you figure you owe them. You mutter a few words best not repeated in the presence of gods or elders, pull on your boots, and head for the ladder with a long stick and a bad attitude. Outside, the morning is wrapped in fog, the good kind, soft and low, curling around rooftops like a protective spell. You breathe it in and feel the familiar ache in your back from months of shared labour. You've lived through your first full winter together, Your first storms, your first flood, your first silent argument, and that one time someone tried to trade you a chicken for your spouse because they seemed useful. You haven't killed each other. In fact, you've learned how to share a roof, a bed, a reputation, and about 4 square feet of personal space. You've figured out their quirks, the way they hum when anxious, how they always carve their initials into the underside of furniture, their habit of offering the last bite without making a show of it. And maybe more importantly, you've figured out your own. Up on the roof, you jab at the chimney until it coughs out a cloud of soot like a demon being exorcised. Mission accomplished. Your face is covered in streaks and your nose tingles, but the fire inside the longhouse finally starts breathing again. Smoke lifts, the room warms. Your spouse hands you a cloth when you come down, doesn't ask, just hands it over with a knowing look and a half smile. "You're disgusting," they say. "You're welcome," you reply. And just like that, the rhythm continues. But today is different. Today marks a year. Your first year of marriage. One full cycle since the longhouse filled with chanting, since someone threw a fish at your feet and called it a blessing, since you lit a fire you had no idea how to keep going. There's no ceremony for this, no formal feast or public announcement, just the quiet, satisfying weight of knowing that you've lasted, grown, not just survived, but coexisted, and maybe even thrived a little. The family offers their own strange tributes. Svala brings you a hand-carved box shaped like a turnip. It holds dried flowers and one aggressively folded note that says, "Love is patient, so is poison." She claims it's a joke. Probably. The goat herder Eric gives you an egg. Just one. When asked what it symbolises, he says, "It's an egg. What else do you want?" Even the Longhouse elders acknowledge the milestone, albeit grudgingly. One of them nods solemnly and mutters, "Could have sworn you'd throw a boot and walk out by now. So you and your spouse don't plan a party, but somehow people show up. A cousin arrives with leftover flatbread. Someone roasts a slab of salted pork. The fire crackles louder, the benches fill, and a few songs, some half-remembered, some improvised on the spot, begin to spill from wine-slick mouths. One old scald leans in and says, "You know what year 2 brings, right?" You raise an eyebrow. "What?" "Less mystery, more laundry, but better kisses." He winks and goes back to drinking. The stories around the hearth begin again. Tales of other couples, other unions, other years. One woman recalls how her first husband got lost in the woods on their anniversary and returned with a dead crow and frostbite. "Second husband brought me honey," she says, grinning. "Much better." Your spouse nudges you gently. "Do we have honey?" You shake your head. "We have flatbread and one symbolic egg." They nod. "Close enough." Later that night, when the guests have trickled out, the embers low and glowing, you sit together in your little alcove, legs tangled under a shared fur. You ask the question softly. "Did you think we'd make it this far?" They pause. "Not at first, but then I learned how you fold your socks." You blink. "That gave you faith?" "Yeah," they say, deadpan, "because no one folds socks like that unless they're in it for the long haul." You both laugh, shoulders shaking, tears stinging, not from sorrow but from the relief of making it, of reaching something steady. You lean against each other, feeling not just warmth but weight, real lived-in partnership. And this is the part historians always miss. They write about the weddings, the dowries, the inheritance laws, but the everyday living of it, the inside jokes, the quiet understanding, the unspoken rituals of who chops wood and who picks herbs, that's the heartbeat of a Viking marriage, not the glory, the glue. There's debate among scholars about how many couples truly bonded this way. Was love a byproduct of function? Did intimacy grow from routine? Or was it a rare spark amid the practicalities? The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But what you know, what you've earned, is that even without flowers or poems or perfect communication, a home can be built. A life. A shared rhythm. Before sleep claims you, your spouse reaches under the bed and pulls out something wrapped in linen. You frown. What's that? They grin. Your gift. Inside is a tiny carved bear, barely the length of your thumb. Its paws are clumsy. Its eyes are uneven. But it's wearing a little cloak. Your cloak. You stare. You made this? They shrug. Figured you could carry it in your pouch, for luck. You hold it tightly. Then reach beneath your own pillow and hand them a bundle of dried seaweed tied with twine. Yours. They blink. Seaweed? From our first walk by the stream, you slipped in, it was funny. They snort, I nearly broke my leg. Romance. You don't say I love you. You say it with a carved bear and soggy seaweed. You say it with shared chores and matching splinters. You say it with the fire still burning. Outside, the snow is gone, the mud is drying, a new season has begun, and you're still here. Together. Now the year stretches out ahead of you like a newly carved path, muddy, uneven, full of promise and potholes. And as you sit by the fire on this quiet night, your shoulders aching from hauling wood, your fingers stained from another round of dyeing wool with crushed berries, you finally let yourself breathe. You've done it. 1 year, one full cycle of smoke, storms, goat-related tension, and soggy mornings. One full chapter of this strange, tangled book you're writing together, without ever quite knowing the plot. No one's handing out medals for making it this far, but they are watching. The neighbours, the elders, the gods maybe, and they're all nodding in that slow, subtle way that means they're getting it. Marriage in the Viking world was never a fairy tale. It wasn't a magic spell you cast once in the glow of a fire with mead on your breath. It was forged like iron, beaten, cooled, tested. Not perfect, but useful, dependable. Something you could carry into battle and still have on your hip when the fighting was done. And sure, there are still arguments. You'll still disagree about when to plant the onions, or whether that one cousin is secretly hiding extra cheese. But now you know how to come back from it. Now you know how to speak your apology without words, by folding their cloak or warming their side of the bed, or saving the last bite of honeycomb even when you really, really want it. You'll keep learning, of course. The years ahead hold their own kinds of weather, children or not. Illness, travel, loss, growth. But you've seen what you're made of together, and it's more than wool and wood and goat fat. It's care, it's choice, it's love, stubborn and quiet and real. And when someone asks you years from now what happened after the first night of your Viking marriage, you'll smile, stretch your back and say,